The story begins with our protagonist taking over the entire school. He stood in the courtyard, and the students worshipped him from the side. His name was Ning Fan. The fan carried a big baseball bat on his shoulder. He looked at the frightened teacher with displeasure. All the teachers in the school were at his feet. The fan quickly dealt with his rivals. Everyone who decided to piss him off was already in the hospital. The main character had many problems in his life before. Late on a rainy evening, he was attacked by fighters with weapons. Fan remembered how he was beaten and exhausted. He had had bad times in his life before too. The main character sat in the classroom at the teacher's desk and looked around in surprise. The fan looked around in surprise and could not understand where he was and what he was doing. The student with glasses looked at Fanya with displeasure. The guy threw his feet on the table and said that the teacher was sleeping in the classroom. Their class D was the worst in the academy. Shinsha students and pupils stopped trying. The main character sat and looked ahead with displeasure. He didn't know what to answer the students. Fan realized in his mind that he was in Class D at Shinsha Academy. He thought to himself that he had just been resurrected. The main character looked at his teacher's ID card in surprise. He realized that his students were sitting at the desks. The student at the table opened her cosmetic bag. She said in a dissatisfied voice that the worthless teacher was teaching in an empty classroom. She added that their class should be disbanded. Fan felt displeased as the student's makeup residue flew onto his face. He thought that all his students were wrong. Students from Class C entered the classroom. One of them kicked the door down in displeasure. The student entered the classroom. He sternly demanded that the guy Zhang Tianyan go and buy him some cigarettes. The stranger grabbed the student by the shoulder and demanded that he give him some money. He promised to return it. The student put his hand on Zhang's head and said that he could ask him about everything in advance. The main character was silent. He looked at the students from the neighboring class and said nothing to them. One of the guys in the audience laughed loudly. The girl at this time turned around and looked out the window. The student with glasses turned around and told his friend that the teacher does nothing when his student is being bullied. The partner told the guy that getting into this class was a complete failure. The main character extended his hand to his face, and his magical vision began to activate. Fan saw the photos of the students in front of him. He thought that people in this world began to acquire special talents. In order to better manage and manipulate people with special abilities, the state created an academy. It specializes in training such gifted people. The teachers at the academy are responsible for awakening their powers. Ning Fan was a relative of one of the 6 directors of Shinsha Academy as well. The guy was the fiancé of the school beauty. There was a fire at Fanya's house. After that, he was the only one who survived in his family. After a very serious disaster in his family, the main character began to drink heavily. The director extended his hand to the guy and sternly said that he would be teaching the worst Class D. His wedding agreement would be cancelled. She, the main character named Shi Yushui, decided to leave him. Fan then left this place. Fan thought slyly to himself that the original owner of his body was a scumbag. The main character couldn't stand what the former owner of his body went through. After that, he decided to help take revenge. Fan looked closely at the group of students near the table. The student angrily approached the guy Zhang and said that he was just trash in Class D. The protagonist turned around and angrily told the stranger that he had to report when he entered the classroom. The fan ran up to the frightened student from the side and swung his hand to hit. The frightened student flew far to the side after being hit by the main character. The fan stood and held his hand in front of him. He shouted at the student who had flown away to get lost. The student stood to the side and watched in amazement as the main character kicked the guy out of the classroom. The crazy teacher system has been activated. The unlocking process has begun. The main character saw a message that the crazy teacher system was unlocked. Fan said to himself in bewilderment that all this could be a gift for his resurrection. The surprised Fan stood inside the system. He received a gift in the form of the famous professor's eye. The system told the owner that with the help of the new eye, he can see everything and find the pros and cons. If the owner wants to continue unlocking new skills, then he needs to gain trust points. Fan was very surprised when he heard about trust points. The protagonist looked around carefully and saw that he had received 1 trust point each from students Li Shi and Zhang. The fan was first surprised, and then happy because he could get trust points if he hit someone. Fan looked at the class register carefully. He thought that student Zhang used to be in Class S, but for some reason his awakening percentage dropped dramatically. Zhang apologized to the teacher in a guilty voice for what happened earlier. Fan told the guy that it was okay. The main character looked closely at the disgruntled student. He thought to himself that until this happened, there would be even greater troubles ahead. Jang bowed to the teacher and explained that it was all his fault. Fan told the boy not to be afraid of anything. He said that he would look into everything now. Fan stretched his hand to his face, and at that moment his magical vision activated. The protagonist saw detailed information about the student Zhang Yan. This guy had an injury to his right hand, which caused his strength to weaken. The fan looked at the student and thought with displeasure that this guy had entered a mental stage after the injury. The main character looked slyly at the student and said that he had problems with his right hand. Zhang shouted to the teacher in a frightened voice that he never said that he had hurt his right hand. Fan answered the guy that he himself would not be a teacher if he had not seen that. Teacher Shunxiang ran into the room. He angrily asked the main character why he hit his student. The main character covered his ears in displeasure. He shouted at Sunu that he was interfering with his lessons. The teacher and the student approached the main character. He asked with displeasure if he really wanted to continue teaching after he had beaten his precious student. The fan replied to the man that he would take him down before finishing the lesson. Shun asked the protagonist with displeasure, "Does he really consider himself the master of the Ning family?" He angrily demanded that Fan leave the Xinsha Academy. The student on the side told the girl that their teacher was in big trouble. The girl told her partner that they should watch. She decided that the fan should apologize. The main character, in a calm and menacing voice, answered the man that he refused to apologize. Zhang and Shi looked at their teacher with surprise and joy. Their trust points increased. The strong man looked at the main character with great surprise, and his trust point increased by 1. Jun told the protagonist in a stern voice that he couldn't be so arrogant. He explained that in this world, only strong people are respected. The protagonist hugged his student and told the teacher that Zhang was much stronger than his student, so they didn't have to apologize. Jun laughed evilly. He asked the protagonist, "Does he really think that Zhang is still a top student in Class S?" The fan looked angrily at the teacher and said that if he didn't believe him, then they could arrange a duel. Shun looked angrily at the protagonist and said that if he fought with him, it would be the same as him dying. Fan replied to the teacher that he could admit that he was just scared. The teacher got angry and pointed his hand at the main character. He offered him a duel. Fan turned to the side and looked at students Li and Shi. He asked them to clear the stage. The girl looked at the main character with displeasure and thought that he shamefully allowed his student to fall into the trap. Zhang shouted to the protagonist in a frightened voice that he could not fight the teacher. The fan grabbed the student by the shoulders with his hands and promised that he would help him. The protagonist turned around and told the surprised student to take off his belt. The main character angrily reminded the frightened guy to take off his belt and not ask questions. Zhang looked at his hand in surprise. Fan tied it to his body with a belt. The fan confidently told the student that he only needed one arm to take down opponents of that level. Jun angrily asked the protagonist, "Is he afraid that he won't be ruthless enough to the student?" Fan put his hand on the guy's back and explained that he would have no time without his right hand. Zhang asked the teacher in a frightened voice, "Can he really do this?" The student ran and waved his hand as he went. He shouted that the scum from Class D must disappear. The fighter stretched out his hand forward and ran at full speed to crush Zhang immediately. Jun and the girl watched Zhang running with great attention and excitement. The main character was calm at this time. Zhang calmly put his hand out in front of him and was able to catch his opponent's hand with it. Zhang suddenly felt a surge of power in his body. He shouted angrily at the student that he used to have a different fist. The student threw his frightened opponent aside. He shouted that his fist had been weak before. The fan stood to the side and happily watched his student. He shouted for him to defeat his opponent. The beaten student lay on the classroom floor between the desks. He was unconscious. Lee said with great surprise that the guy actually failed a student from Class C. The girl could not understand why Zhang's strength increased after he tied his right hand. The student thought to herself in surprise that the main character's methods really work. Jun was very surprised that his student lost. He shouted in a frightened voice, "This is impossible!" The main character very angrily told the teacher to leave the classroom. He had other classes planned. Jun sternly pointed to the side. He demanded that the students take the beaten guy out of here. 2 students came up from behind and grabbed the beaten guy to carry him away. Sun stood up and angrily shouted at the protagonist that he could just wait. Shut. Lee and the student stood and silently watched the teacher leave. The students around clapped their hands and shouted to the main character that they really had beaten the class. Fan was very surprised. He did not understand why his students were so happy. The students' trust points for him increased. Zhang looked at the teacher with gratitude and thanked him for his instructions. The main character put his hands on the student's shoulders and said that he would thank him after he healed his hand. After that, the guy's strength would increase even more. Chang looked at the protagonist with a smile and thanked him for his help. She and Lee began to ask the protagonist with a smile to help them heal. A female student came up from the side and angrily shouted at the surprised guys to shut up. The girl asked the main character with displeasure if he could compare with Zhang. Fan looked ahead and felt that the student wanted him to instruct her. The main character explained to his partner in a calm voice that he teaches with an approach and can cure all diseases. The student asked the teacher with displeasure, "Could he really do this?" The main character looked at the girl with surprise with his special eye. He told her with a smile that he would instruct her. The fan looked at the student with a sly smile and demanded that she not move. The main character carefully examined the girl's body. She had the ability to summon power. Most of her spiritual power was in her hair. The main character was surprised when he realized that most of the girl's spiritual power was contained in her hair. The student looked at the teacher with displeasure. Fan calmly told the girl that he could determine her problem. The partner asked the guy with displeasure, "What is her problem?" The fan explained to the girl that he would tell her about the problem when they were in the training room. The girl closed her eyes in displeasure and shouted that everything was great. The fan ran to the exit and waved his hand. He shouted to the students to come and see the phenomenon. The main character stood with two students near the entrance to the training hall. The fan looked happily at the entrance to the hall and said that he was very lucky that no one had come yet. Two teachers appeared from the side. They shouted at the students to stop. The teacher with glasses and blonde hair wanted to tell the students about the training room. The man in glasses looked at the guy and the girl and explained to them that they would occupy this hall. The main character, together with his students, was in the school building near the training hall. The novice teacher, Chiefin of Class C, looked at the students next to him with displeasure. The main character told the teachers in a dissatisfied voice that there was always a line here and they had to respect it. He said to the students in a dissatisfied voice that they had come here for the first time and could not even use summoning spells. They had no right to use the training hall. The student stood and looked at her hands in surprise. There was a magic bird next to her. He looked at his colleague, So Yan, with displeasure and demanded that he show Mr. Ning his real strength. Jan happily ran forward. He shouted to the teacher that he would do everything just like that. The man happily extended his hands forward and activated the spell. After Yan's magical attack, several flying stone monsters appeared in front of him. The student was very surprised. She realized that Yan could actually use the basic summoning spell on the two-chambered golems. She said in a dejected voice that he remembered the first time the girl summoned a pile of rocks. Lee replied to his friend that for his older sister, the most opportune moment was summoning pathetic golems. The student looked angrily at the guys and shouted in a loud voice for them to shut up. The teacher stood. Several stones were flying above his hands. He told the main character that it was his student's turn. The protagonist turned around and told the girl that she could use her hair as a conductor of powers. She laughed. He told the boy in a loud voice that only blood can be a conductor of power. Yang smiled and answered the teacher that for Mr. Ning to do such a thing was in the order of things. The main character turned to the girl and demanded that she do what he said. The student closed her eyes and concentrated. She activated her magical skills. The girl stretched her hands out in front of her in fear, and after that there was a loud explosion. He was very surprised. He saw a huge pile of stones in front of him inside the hall. Two demonic stone golems stood and looked at each other angrily. The student was surprised. She couldn't believe that she was able to summon such a huge golem. She put his hand on his surprised friend's shoulder. Lee asked him discontentedly what he was doing. Chang looked at the golem happily and clapped his hands. A short student with glasses stood next to him. The girl with glasses silently looked at the stone golem and said nothing. He looked at the perfect stone golems in surprise. He couldn't believe that this could happen. Fan looked ahead happily and said that Mr. Qi couldn't believe his eyes. A surprised girl stood next to him. The protagonist demanded from the student that the teachers experience it for themselves. The student looked at the guy carefully and answered him in a sly voice that she understood him. The girl happily extended her fingers in front of her and activated her magic skill. Huge magical stone monsters began to menacingly march forward. Two small golems stood in fear and looked at the stone monsters walking towards them. Jan was very surprised and scared when he saw that the stone monsters had crushed the little golems. Fan approached the teacher and said that he could try Mega Kill on him a couple more times. He was very puzzled. He never expected that hair could actually increase the awakening rate. The student stood behind and silently looked at the man. She didn't know how he could know about it. The student turned away with displeasure and said that all this was very boring. Fan asked Ting with a smile if she would listen to him now. Chi said to the protagonist with surprise that he could help the girl improve. Fan couldn't even use the basic summoning spell at the moment. Fan looked at the teacher in surprise and asked, "Can he use this spell?" Chi angrily told the protagonist that he would show him now. He took out a small blade and brought it to his hand. The teacher swung his knife sharply and carefully cut his finger. After that, blood appeared. The main character stood next to the girl. They saw in front of them how a strong explosion was heard in the hall. A huge group of stone monsters appeared in the room. Chi happily shouted that with the basic summoning spell, he could also summon an army of golems. The man demanded that the girl Ting join their class. The main character asked the teacher with displeasure, "Is this really all he can do?" Fan stretched out his hand and shouted at the man for making him wait in vain. A huge stone monster appeared above him. Ting and other students stood nearby and looked at the main character in surprise. He was very surprised and scared. He could not believe that Fan was able to summon such huge stone monsters. The main character sternly pointed his finger forward and demanded that the teacher clean up the broken tiles. Teacher Chi was very scared. He screamed in a loud voice. His scream echoed throughout the school. The main character sat calmly on top of the head of the destroyed little golem. Teacher Chi near the exit shouted to the main character that he would get more from him. Fan thought to himself that the phrase from the teacher seemed familiar to him. Two students ran up from the side. They raised their hands up and shouted at the teacher to accept their respectful regard. The two boys fell to their knees in front of the teacher and bowed. Their trust points increased. The system informed the master that he had accumulated a point. He received a new skill called Master Worship. The system told the owner that if he uses the skill on someone, that person will definitely perform the action. The fan thought to himself in surprise that such a power could exist. Ting approached the students and said in a dissatisfied voice that they could be better. The main character looked slyly at the student and decided to use his new skill on her. Fan extended his hand forward and a golden glow appeared near him. He used a skill called Master Worship on the girl. Ting shouted in a dissatisfied voice to the students that they could continue bowing. She herself wanted to leave. The student suddenly felt that she could not move aside. It was as if some force was holding her. Fan sat slyly on top of the stone and looked attentively at the girl. Ting unexpectedly fell to her knees and bowed to the main character. She was very surprised. Li and Shai turned around in surprise at the bowing girl. Ting didn't understand what was happening to her. The fan was very surprised that the student bowed to him. He thought that the probability of a bow was 100%. Zhang came up and told the students that they didn't have to bow anymore. Their teacher wasn't such a vulgar person. The system informed the protagonist that he had activated the worship of Zhang Tian. The student suddenly felt like he could no longer stand on his feet. He fell to the ground. Zhang felt in his body that he could no longer stand on his feet and fell to his knees. Zhang, along with the other students, fell into a deep bow before the teacher. Shi and Li were very surprised when they saw a bow from the student. The guy shouted that he couldn't even open his eyes. The main character looked at the real lonely student with glasses with surprise. He decided that she was very lonely now. The girl looked at the teacher very attentively through her glasses. She studied him with her eyes. The student fell on her back on the ground. She decided that she would not bow to the teacher if she lay down like that. Fan stretched out his hand and activated a worship skill against the student Gu Xiuwei. Suddenly, Su rose above the ground on her own. The students on the side looked at her in surprise. The guys were surprised. One student shouted that the girl had lain down beforehand to make it harder for her to bow. Fan smiled and told the students that there was no need for that. When the students were around him, they could relax. He had no intention of deceiving them. Inside the classroom of Class C, a disgruntled teacher slammed his hand on the table with all his might. Sun shouted in an angry and dissatisfied voice that he wanted to finish off the main character. The door to the office suddenly opened and Chi looked in very carefully. He thought happily to himself that the man Sun also got it from the main character. Teacher Chi suggested to Shunyu in an angry voice that they unite together against Fan. Shun looked ahead. He shouted in an angry voice that Fan was very arrogant. He shouted at his colleague in an angry voice that Fan was still very arrogant, even when he was the teacher of Class D. Jun jumped to his feet. Near the table, he asked his colleague in a dissatisfied voice how he could tolerate this madness. Chi, sitting, answered the man that he must avenge this feud. After a short pause, Chi said that the guy was able to regain some of his power, so it wouldn't be easy to humiliate him. Zun shouted confidently to the teacher that it would not be easy for the boy to fully recover. The teachers continued to sit in the office and heatedly discuss something among themselves. A girl appeared near the door. The student stood near the door and listened carefully. The teacher shouted to his colleague that they needed to do it. The girl listened to the teacher's conversations through the door. At that time, she remembered the main character. Fan walked in the evening. He told himself that the teacher's system is very powerful. It can change the strength of students in a day. Jun looked angrily at the protagonist and said that he had finally arrived. Chi looked at the guy with displeasure and said that they had been waiting for him. Fan asked the teachers in a sly voice, "Were they really waiting to invite him to dinner?" Jun shouted at the boy in a dissatisfied voice that no one was going to invite him at such an hour. Jun angrily flexed his hands. He told the guy that they wanted to invite him to eat something. Chi made a fist out of his hand. He threatened the guy that they would feed him with their fists now. The fan looked at the teachers with displeasure and asked again, "Do they really want to fight him here?" Jun pointed an angry hand at the guy and demanded that he leave the school himself and not force them to fight. Kai explained to the guy in a reasonable voice so that he wouldn't blame them for their cruelty later. He could only blame himself for the misunderstanding. The boss raised his hand up. He wanted to ask his partners one last question. The guy slyly asked the teachers, did they really decide to defeat him together? The clothes on Jun's body suddenly tore. He shouted at the guy not to be arrogant. Jun turned into a huge monster. Chi grabbed the mutant by the leash and shouted at the guy that he would test the power of his summoning. The main character looked ahead thoughtfully. He decided to use his master worship skill against the teachers. The teachers angrily shouted at the boy that he was going to die now. At this time, Fan activated a skill against Jun and Chi. The main character looked in surprise as both teachers bowed before him. Fan looked down at his feet in front of him. He saw the monster kneeling in front of him next to the teachers. Sun and Chi were very angry. They couldn't get up on their feet. At that moment, the door to the office opened and a student looked in. She decided that she couldn't leave the guy alone. The girl was surprised to see the teachers kneeling in front of the fan. The student said to herself in a dissatisfied voice that she had thought too much. The main character looked at the teachers with displeasure and angrily asked if they would continue. Jun looked angrily at the protagonist and threatened to kill him. The teachers looked angrily at the boy and threatened that they would destroy him now. The protagonist looked angrily at his rivals and said that he liked their attitude. He clenched his fist with all his might. He shouted at the teacher to summon his army of stone golems. Shun, with his eyes burning, asked the protagonist in an angry voice if his golems could defeat his stone monsters. The protagonist laughed evilly. He told his opponents that he had no intention of using that initial summoning skill. Fan glared at the teachers and said that he would use his most artificial tactics against them. The main character suddenly shone very brightly. Shun covered himself with his hand in surprise. The man moved his hand away in surprise and looked closely at the beaming guy. The protagonist angrily extended his hand forward and told the man that his dominant call was approaching. Fan said in a sly voice that his dominant did not need any conductors of forces. A monster in a dark suit with a scythe appeared next to the main character. He looked like death. He was frightened. He felt a strange, intense feeling in his body. The main character raised his hand up. He looked slyly at the teachers and said that they needed to start now. The monster angrily rose up on its hind legs and growled menacingly. He prepared to pounce on the fighter in the death suit. Death swung its scythe wide and threw the predator far back with a powerful blow. Jun was very surprised. He looked ahead with fear after the flying mutant. The main character put his hand in front of him and angrily shouted to the teacher that the enemy was standing right in front of him. Fan stretched out his hand and attacked Jun with a bright yellow light. The man received a very strong blow. He was wounded and could no longer resist. The main character looked angrily at the teacher and shouted that he was his rival. The main character came to the university building on a clear day to see the students. Lee told his friends in a very joyful voice that teachers Sun and Chi were injured and were now in the hospital. The men couldn't even see what the criminal looked like. The fan entered the office and greeted the students in a very tired voice. The two boys joyfully raised their hands up and greeted the teacher together. Student Zhang looked happily at the protagonist and greeted him. Tin sat at her desk dissatisfied. She didn't like the morning greetings. Sue sat at her desk and was silent. She looked at the main character with displeasure. Fan looked carefully at the class register. He told the students that they would take roll call before the lesson began. The teacher began to loudly call out the names of the students and they responded to him from their seats. Fan asked the student if Chu Fen hadn't come yet. Jung explained to the teacher that the guy Chu hadn't been in class for a month, and he didn't know the exact reason for his absence. The main character looked at the students. He asked them, for whom of them he can help in improving skills today. The girl raised her hand above herself in fear and told the teacher that he could help her. The main character asked the student with great interest, does she really want to start? Zhu told the teacher in a frightened voice that she was not feeling well and that she needed to go to the medical center. The fan calmly told the girl that she could go out if she wanted. The main character turned to the side and looked closely at the sitting students. Shi shouted joyfully to the teacher that he wanted to continue. Li shouted joyfully that he wanted to become stronger. Fan headed for the door. He told the students that he was going out for a walk. They could study on their own for now. Li and Shai both looked at the departing teacher with great displeasure. The main character went to the medical center. He decided to check the student's condition. The fan stood near the entrance to the office and watched the girl closely. Sue behind the screen told the teacher that he could come in, and she took off her clothes. The main character was very shocked. He couldn't believe that all this could be normal. The patient behind the screen said discontentedly that the teacher should hurry up. She could change her mind. Fan felt very worried. He didn't understand what the girl was talking about. The guy decided that he could use his master's eyes to examine Sue. The main character reached forward and pulled the screen aside. He decided to just take a quick look around. A doctor came in from the side. She angrily asked the guy what he was trying to do. A doctor named Li Chao Chao held a huge syringe in her hands. She asked the guy, what does he want to do with the patient? The main character took pictures of the girl from all sides together with Chao. Fan ran around the student with a camera. Chao playfully told the girl that she had found another teacher, but she forgave him. Chao, with a camera in her hand, told the girl in a joyful voice that she could now change back. The worried protagonist with a camera told the student that next time he would prepare a few more outfits for her. Sue changed into her normal clothes and came out from behind the curtain. She told the teacher that she was okay and could come back. Chao turned around and told the protagonist that he could transfer the girl to her if he couldn't teach her. Sue had a very low awakening percentage, so she was only suitable for healing training. Fan asked the woman with great excitement, could he really not teach the student anything? He told Chao that he would now show her his abilities. The main character put his hand to his face. He activated the ability of the master's eye on the student Sue. Fan carefully examined the girl's body. She was very fast in casting spells. She was also suitable for using high-level magic. The protagonist learned that Sue is a spy for the Divine Spirit Special Ability Alliance. Fan remembered to himself that the Special Ability Alliance chant is the second command. Chao looked at the protagonist with displeasure and asked, didn't he find anything? The main character shouted in a loud and surprised voice that Xu Wei is a mathematical genius. She was very surprised when she heard from the guy that she was a genius. Chao pointed her hand at the girl with displeasure and said that Ta couldn't even use the most basic healing magic. The woman explained with displeasure that Xu was her worst student. The fan explained to his partner with a smile that the student was a genius in using destructive magic. Chao shouted at the boy in an angry voice that using destruction magic was 10 times stronger than healing magic. The female student would never be able to use destruction magic. The main character turned around and asked the girl with interest if she had used destruction magic. Xu calmly answered her partner that she had not used it. The fan stroked the student's head with his hand and said that she would now be a destruction mage. A disgruntled woman ran up from the side. She shouted at the guy that he had no right to teach a girl. She told the teacher in a frightened voice that she wanted to trust the main character. Chao looked at the girl with displeasure and sternly. She called her by name. A student suddenly entered the classroom. She apologized to the teacher for interrupting her. Chao looked at the student with displeasure and said that she should have already been cured thanks to the healing magic. Fan was surprised to hear that healing magic couldn't cure the fever. Chao placed her hand on the student's body. The protagonist carefully analyzed Zhang Qin's condition. Fan told the woman in a cunning voice to stop. Chao couldn't cure the young patient. Chao turned around with displeasure and asked the protagonist why he decided that she couldn't cure the little patient. The fan spread his arms wide to the side. He told the woman that the girl wasn't even sick. Qin was surprised when she heard that the student was not sick. Xu looked at the protagonist with excitement. Chao asked the guy in a dissatisfied voice why he decided to tell her about the patient's illness. The fan looked sternly at the woman and said that there were some things she couldn't tell apart. The protagonist asked Qin if she had encountered the problem and if she realized that her awakening percentage had not increased. Fan happily reached out and grabbed the medical gown to put it on. The main character carefully put on a white robe. He wanted to say what was the reason for the heat in Chin. The fan began to put white gloves on his hands. He said that the girl's inner fire was awakening. The protagonist looked slyly at the woman and said that her healing method stopped the awakening of Chin. Chow and the female students looked at the guy in surprise when they heard such words from him. The girl looked at the main character with excitement and timidly asked what she should do. Fan sat in a meditative pose on the big flower. He raised his hand in front of him and told the woman that he could fix it. Chin anxiously asked the teacher to help her. Fan told the student that it would be easy for him. The woman told the main character with great interest that she wanted to see what he would do there. Fan looked slyly at the teacher and said that he would give her a free lesson. He stood near a large box. The main character bought a bunch of different delicious food from a large vending machine, Fan, and the students sat happily and ate the food. Chow said that it was very tasty. The woman turned away with displeasure. She shouted that they were eating food hot. Fan responded to his partner so that she could continue eating. Shu said in a thoughtful voice that the protagonist would use this method to awaken the girl's fire magic. Chow was surprised when she heard that hot food could awaken Chin. Chow turned around and looked at the student with displeasure. Chin consumed the food in fear. Suddenly, the girl woke up. A bright glow appeared near her body. Chow was very scared. She looked at the student and couldn't believe that this was happening. Chin looked at her burning hands in fear. She realized that her strength had increased. The fan told the girl in a dissatisfied voice that her awakening had only increased by 5%. Chin looked at her teacher very happily and shouted that this would be enough for her. The girl turned around and ran towards the exit. She shouted to the teacher that she would use this method to increase her awakening faster. Chow was very unpleasantly surprised. She did not understand how the girl was able to improve her powers so easily. The main character looked angrily at the woman and asked, "Does she believe him now?" An irritated Chow shouted at the guy in an angry voice that he was just lucky. The main character put his hand on the girl's shoulder. He said that the students should believe in him. The fan looked at the student and told her that she had just seen what he could do. The protagonist turned around and told the student that she should follow him. He would open the door for her to a new world. Shu looked at the main character with interest and said that she agreed. In the training area in the large hall, students were practicing. They were learning various skills. The fan entered the room with his companion. The girl looked around with interest. The angry student came up and asked with displeasure, "Has Mr. Ning really come to see them here?" The main character asked the girl with displeasure if she had heard the dog barking. The student got angry when he heard such words from the teacher. He looked at him angrily. The guy told the main character that this place serves to train destruction mages. Outsiders are not welcome here. The main character put his hand on the girl's head and stroked it. Shu silently looked ahead. The fan turned around and asked the student, "Is he afraid that he will destroy this place?" The boy laughed evilly. He found the teacher's words very funny. The student said in an angry voice that the girl, Shu Wei, can't even use basic healing magic. Now the student has gone for destruction magic, the guy said in a happy voice that the student has followed in the footsteps of the crazy teacher. The main character angrily told the students that they dare not insult his students. The two guys hugged each other in fear and said in a sly voice that they were very scared. Shu turned around and asked the teacher, "Can she really do this?" The main character looked at the student and told her in a confident voice to believe in him. The fan came close to the student and began to whisper something to her. She listened to him attentively. The teacher asked the girl if she remembered everything. Shu answered her partner that she understood everything. The student told the girl in a stern voice that she could approach him and not worry. The student said in an angry voice that he did not believe in the girl's ability to use middle-class magic. The guy looked at the girl carefully. He was very scared and worried. Shu closed her eyes and spread her arms to the side. There was a magical glow around her. The student looked angrily ahead. She prepared to activate the magic. The girl stretched out her hands in front of her and screamed menacingly. There was a bright glow around her. Bright lightning bolts flew from the student's hands. They crashed into the wall and a loud explosion was heard. The student was very surprised. He could not believe that the girl could use such strong magic. The student stood and looked ahead in fear. He could not believe that such a thing could be possible. The surprised guy couldn't understand how the girl could use third-level magic. Her personal awakening percentage was less than 10%. The fan looked angrily at the students and asked, "Do they really only look at the awakening percentage?" The main character put his hand on the girl's head and stroked it. He said that the value of his students was not determined by any boring numbers. Shu folded her arms across her chest and looked at her teacher with admiration. The student angrily extended his hand to the protagonist and shouted that his students and he himself were worth nothing. The fan looked angrily at his partner and said that he would be under his foot. The student got really angry. He loudly threatened the main character that he would punch him in the face. The guy viciously threatened the main character that he would fight him today, even if he was punished. The fan looked sternly at the student and said that he was very confident in himself. The main character looked angrily at his opponent and shouted that he could try to beat him. Shu grabbed the teacher by the side of his clothes. She told him that they needed to go back and not get into trouble. The main character reached forward and stroked the student's head. She looked at him silently. Shu looked away with displeasure. He said that he should give change if someone offends his student. The main character looked at the frightened girl and told her not to worry. Fan looked at his hand. He remembered that the teacher's crazy system helped others increase their strength. He himself also recovered. The protagonist glanced at the student and thought angrily that this should be enough to fight him. The fan extended his hand in front of him and beckoned the angry student towards him. The main character angrily told the guy that he could start against him first. The student folded his hands and a blue lightning appeared between them. He said angrily to the main character that he would regret his words. The student extended his hand forward and launched a magic blade at the protagonist. He used lightning magic and an electric attack. Fan turned around and extended his hand to the side. He said in a dissatisfied voice that he expected the attack to be more powerful. A protective yellow dome appeared around the main character. The student was very unpleasantly surprised. Fan looked away slyly. He realized that he had overestimated his opponent and underestimated the system. His strength did not end here. Bright yellow lightning appeared around the guy's body. He shouted to his opponent that it was his turn now. The main character raised his hand high, and a yellow lightning bolt descended on him from above. Fan raised his hand up and shouted that he had activated the 8th level lightning. The main character, after a short pause, activated a skill called Thunder's Wrath. The student was scared and angry. He could not understand how this could be possible. The student was very excited. She called her teacher in a frightened voice. The main character stretched out his hand forward and shouted in a menacing voice about a flash of lightning. The student got scared. He turned around and looked at the main character in surprise. A huge yellow lightning bolt came down from above and struck the frightened boy. He screamed loudly. The main character stood silently to the side. He looked at the beaten student with interest. Fan looked ahead happily. He had regained most of his power. From that moment on, he decided to use the system to upgrade. The fan turned around angrily and shouted at the students to get out with their friend. The frightened guys picked up the student in their arms and shouted that they understood everything. They headed off to the side. The fan looked happily at the student and said that no one would make fun of her when he was next to her. Shu turned around and looked at the teacher with great excitement. She studied him carefully. The fan looked at the student with displeasure and sternly asked her what was the matter. Shu jumped up to the main character and asked with excitement if she would be as strong as he was. Fan extended his hand in front of him and told the girl that his students must be stronger than he was. The main character stood and noticed with surprise how the girl turned her back to him. Shu turned away and cried quietly. Her trust points for the teacher increased. The main character approached the girl from behind. Shu, with tears in her eyes, told the guy that this was the first time someone believed in her like that. The fan looked happily at the student and said that he wanted to tell her something. The main character told the girl in a joyful voice that without glasses she looks like a cutie. Shu was very happy when she heard such a compliment from the guy. She laughed cheerfully to herself. The girl threw her glasses on the floor. The teacher told her to stop crying and follow him. The students of Class D were sitting inside at their desks. They were unhappy because their teacher had not come. Shai came up to the side and told his friends that their teacher was looking for Shu Wei. The student said, in a dissatisfied voice, that Shu was always gloomy and it irritated him. She told his friend in a sly voice that they should always look at Ting when talking about appearance. Tin thought happily to herself that the guys next to her had good eyesight. The main character happily entered the office. He waved his hands to everyone and shouted that he was back. The students joyfully approached the teacher and congratulated him on his return. Shu stood and silently looked ahead. There were tears in her eyes. The students looked at the girl with great desire. They felt in love. Suddenly, the two guys turned around and looked at the disgruntled teen behind them. The student raised her hand up. She shouted in an angry voice at the guys that they wanted death. Shu walked around the classroom with a dissatisfied expression. She approached Zhang. The student greeted the girl with a joyful voice. She greeted him modestly in response. The main character stood to the side and watched the conversation between the guy and the girl with great attention. a beaten student ran into the office. He complained to the director that the fan had beaten him. Director Sean sat at the table. He thought that the main character had not been so arrogant before. The student angrily continued to demand from the director that Fanya not get away with all this. The man told the student in an angry voice that he would not let the main character get up. Sean slammed his hand on the table with all his might. He threatened that Fan and his students would leave Shinsha Academy. A group of students approached the academy building. They stood near the entrance. The students stood near the notice board. They read that the educational institution will use the equipment to its fullest extent. If there are less than 7 people in the class, such people will not be qualified. Ting on the side said to her friend with great excitement that only their class did not meet the requirement of Shinsha Academy. The main character approached the announcement and stretched out his hand to tear it off the wall. Fan looked closely at the torn announcement. He said in a dissatisfied voice that it was an appeal only to Class D. The main character said to the girl in a thoughtful voice that there were 6 people in their class, not counting Chu Feng. Sue told the teacher in a worried voice that they still needed one more person. The protagonist tore up the notice and threw the paper behind him. He was going to go to the Feng family. The students were supposed to stay and study by themselves. Li was unhappy that they had to stay and study on their own again. She said in a dissatisfied voice that the teacher could go after class. Fen turned around and told the students that there was free time after class. Shu asked her friend if he would go to the training ground with her. She wanted to learn new magical skills. Zhang looked at the girl shyly and said that he would go with her. Ting approached the students and said in a stern voice that they would go with her to train. Li and Shai waved their hands and explained to the student that they wanted to stay with Shu. Ting beat up 2 students with displeasure. 2 stone golems pulled Li and Shi by the legs. The main character went up to a large building. He wanted to go home to a student and approached the door of the Chu family. The hostess came to the door and opened it for the guest. Fan looked inside the apartment in surprise. The woman opened the doors. She was holding a cross in her hands. There were amulets hanging on her clothes. She was surprised when she saw the guy. The main character happily told the hostess that he simply came to visit the student Chu Feng. The woman happily rushed to the guy. She shouted for him to look at her child. The main character was very surprised and scared when he realized that the student was bewitched. The hostess opened the door to the room and let the main character in. The light was turned off inside. Fan looked around the room carefully. There was complete silence inside. Fan said in an excited voice that it was Che Fen in front of him. The mother confirmed that it was her son. The main character saw a small box in front of him. It had 2 small holes. The woman held a cross in her hand. She excitedly told the boy that her son had come home from school a month ago and hid in a box. After that, he didn't say a word. The mother asked the guest in fear, "Have you really bewitched your son?" The fan answered the woman that nothing of the sort had happened. The main character at the door told the woman not to worry. He wanted to talk to the guy. Fan approached the box. He told the student in a stern voice to come out and talk to him. The box stood motionless. The main character looked at it silently. The fan shouted at the student in a stern voice that he was forcing him to resort to violence. The main character raised a large box over his head in irritation. He shouted at the guy that he was forcing him to use force. Fan holding a box in his hands, he noticed that she had another identical box on the floor below. The irritated protagonist continued to throw cardboard containers around himself. Under the boxes, the main character was surprised to notice a frightened student wearing a black mask on his head. The fan calmed down. He told the guy in the room that he just wanted to look him over. The protagonist's magical vision was activated. He used the master's eye on Chu Fen. Fan got detailed information about student Chu. Fen loved flying objects. This student had fuzzy magic and was likely to fall while running. The guy was quite brave. The main character looked closely at the student and said that it was very obvious that he loved flying objects. The fan saw a picture of a big eagle on the wall. He didn't know how to test a student's courage. The main character was surprised to see the student hiding behind a cardboard box on the floor. The fan suddenly ran up to the guy and tore off his mask. He angrily asked the frightened student where he was going. The student fell to the ground. He demanded that the protagonist give him the opportunity to leave. Fan calmed down a little. He sat down next to the student lying on the floor and looked at him carefully. The main character asked the guy, "Is he really not coming?" Chu answered the teacher in fear that he was not coming. The student shouted to the teacher in a frightened voice that he would never return to class. The main character suddenly grabbed the student with his hand and prepared to throw him out the window. Chu shouted to the teacher in a frightened voice that it wasn't really a matter of him not wanting to go to class. The main character threw the student out the window. He shouted after him that it was too late. The fan threw the guy out of the window very far, and he started to fall down in fear. The fan jumped out of the window after the frightened student and flew down with him. Chu was falling at high speed from the window down. He looked in fear as the earth approached him. The protagonist told the frightened student to open his eyes. Chu opened one eye. The student looked ahead in fear and noticed that he was hovering above the ground. Fan slowly descended from the heights to the ground. He told the student that his flying magic had almost reached the last obstacle. Chu asked the teacher with displeasure why he had thrown him out the window. The fan looked at the student with a smile and answered him that all this was true. The main character answered the guy with a smile that he would run later and also fall. Fan told the surprised guy that he could fly. Chu hovered above the ground and looked ahead in surprise. The main character was playing a computer game while flying. He was boxing against a game opponent. The main character was carried away by a computer game. He was sitting on the back of a flying student. Chu was hovering high above the ground. Fan looked ahead with a happy and attentive look. He said that life is beautiful. The protagonist looked down from a great height and saw the building. He told the student that they were almost at the school. The fan on the back of the flying student strictly commanded him to land. Athletes competed at the big school stadium. Teacher Fairy commanded student Lee to break the Class C record this time. Fei clutched a stopwatch in his hand. He sternly shouted at the guy to run faster and try to break another record. Lee told the man not to worry. The teacher looked closely at the runners and commanded them to go to the start. Fei fired his pistol and the athletes rushed forward at full speed. Lee suddenly pulled ahead of the others. Lee looked away with displeasure and very angrily asked, "What should he see now? Who will be able to beat his record?" The running student noticed with surprise how the main character was flying next to him from above the Chu. Suddenly, the main character suddenly rushed forward. The student behind him looked after him in fear. Lee looked in fear after the guy who had flown away. His outerwear was torn to pieces. The students around looked in surprise at the half-naked student on the path. Lee looked down in front of him, very frightened. An expensive black car drove up to the building and stopped near the entrance. A student in a suit got out of the car. He looked at the Shinsha Academy with surprise. On the training ground, a group of students were learning various magical skills. Lee hugged his friend Shi and asked him in a sad voice to come back quickly. A student named Tin came up from the side. She shouted at the students in a displeased voice to shut up. If the teacher didn't come back, they could study on their own. The guest entered the training ground. He looked at the girl from the side. The stranger asked the student, "Where is the academic department located here?" Tin asked the stranger in a displeased voice if he was afraid that someone would hit him. The guy angrily asked the students if any of these guys really wanted to hit him. Lee pounced on the stranger from above and wanted to hit him with his hand. He shouted at the guy that he dared to be rude to the girl. The student calmly put up a magical defense in front of himself. Lee was unable to break through it with a blow in flight. Lee flew far to the side after an unsuccessful attack against the stranger. The guy fell to the ground and flew to the side after an unsuccessful blow against his opponent. The stranger looked angrily at the students and said that they could not hit him. Tin looked at the guest with displeasure and asked sternly, "Does he really want to fight?" She pulled out a small hair. Huge stone golems appeared near the girl. She shouted discontentedly to the stranger that she would keep him company. The student stood. There were huge stone golems next to her. The stranger looked at her calmly. Tin looked at the student with displeasure and promised in a stern voice that she would not kill him. The fighter told the student in a dissatisfied voice that her small stones would not be able to break his barrier. Tin shouted to the guy in a stern voice that they would now watch. Two stone monsters ran forward. The stranger stood and calmly watched as the stone golems rushed at full speed to attack him. The fighter put a dome of magical attack in front of him. The golems were unable to penetrate it. The stone monsters flew to the side after the unsuccessful attack. The warrior stood calmly and looked at them. Tin was very surprised and scared. She didn't expect the guy to destroy her monsters. The stranger stood inside the protective dome, the stone golems next to him continuing to crumble. After a short pause, the two stone monsters fell apart and scattered into small stones. The fighter told the girl in a boring voice that her teacher was not so good anymore. Zhang ran up from the side with the girl. He asked the stranger with displeasure what he had said. The stranger angrily asked the girl, "Didn't she like his words about the teacher?" Shu stretched out her hands in front of her, and a bright blue glow appeared next to them. The girl launched a bright lightning bolt at the stranger. The fighter stood under a magical protective dome. The unfamiliar fighter stood and calmly looked ahead. The girl's attack did not harm him in any way. Zhang got very angry. He swung his hand and decided to try to attack the stranger. The student ran at full speed and decided to try to break through the protective dome over the stranger with his hands. Zhang tried to break through the protective dome with powerful blows of his hand. He failed. The stranger stood calmly. The student looked ahead with anger and displeasure. He did not understand what was wrong with the barrier of the warrior opposite him. Zhang jumped back sharply. He was unable to break through the protective barrier around the warrior. The student jumped back sharply. There were frightened girls standing next to him. The stranger clapped his hands. He told the students that he admired their teacher and their bravery. Tin looked at the stranger very angrily. She didn't know what to say to him. The fighter told the girl that she could call her teacher to hold a match. Tin asked her partner with displeasure. How could he know their teacher? The main character appeared from the side. He said in a joyful voice that someone called him. Fan continued to fly from above on the student. The stranger was very surprised when he saw the flying protagonist in front of him. The main character suddenly jumped off the flying student from above and began to slowly land on the ground. Chu fell sharply to the ground after the flight. Fan glanced sideways at the student and said that next time he would teach him to land carefully. The stranger approached the main character from the side and said that his students were not so good. The main character looked angrily at the student and threatened that he would make him take his words back. Students approached from the side. They asked the main character for forgiveness because they could not defeat the stranger. The teacher sternly told the students that any shield could be overcome. They just used the wrong methods. The stranger angrily demanded that the criminal hero show the students the correct method. Fan said in an angry voice that this is exactly what he was talking about. His red eye lit up. The protagonist decided to analyze the guest named Zitian-ge. Fan saw the detailed characteristics of the fighter. He was a defense mage and was awakened to 40%. The main character shouted to his rival in a joyful and angry voice that it was all over for him. The students came up and complained to their teacher that Sei had beaten them. Shai strictly demanded that Fan not let the fighter go just like that. He laughed very evilly. He shouted at the teacher to look at his pathetic students. The Fan angrily shouted at his opponent that he loved to fight, but still hid in the barrier. He got angry, looked at the main character with displeasure, and angrily asked what he said. The main character pointed his hand at the students. He demanded that they come to him and he wanted to teach them something. The Fan looked closely at his friends and said that they should fight back if they were humiliated. The protagonist activated the Master's Eye to find out details about Shifeng. Shifeng was an expert in controlling human minds with destruction magic. Li Sui was a mental mage and very weak in power. In an unconscious state, his power could increase many times. Suddenly, an idea came to the main character's mind. He became very worried. The main character angrily commanded the students not to come closer to him as soon as possible. He wanted to take another look. The protagonist looked closely at the students. They stood next to each other and hugged each other. The students asked the teacher with great excitement, "Can they really become stronger?" Fan looked happily at the students and confirmed that they could certainly become stronger. Fan pointed his finger at C and ordered the students to take down this fighter. The main character stood surrounded by students. He asked them sternly if they understood everything. The students answered unanimously that they understood everything. The Fan pointed his finger forward at the two guys. He said that they would be the hosts. Li asked the teacher in fear if he knew their strength. Xu explained that they still couldn't fight with C. The main character hugged the two students. He said that the two of them could defeat the opponent. They should work together. The teacher told Shi Fen to use his destruction magic to control Li Shu's consciousness. Ting asked in a dissatisfied voice, "How can one use destruction magic on comrades?" The student said in an angry voice that if the teacher said so, then she should not feel sorry for him now. Shai stretched out his two hands in front of him. He excitedly told his friend that they were about to start. A dark aura appeared around the student. He looked up in front of him with an unseeing gaze. Li couldn't stand on his feet. He started to sway from side to side. There was still a dark aura around him. The student had no control over his body movements. He was swaying from side to side. The protagonist demanded that Shi control the boy Li to attack the opponent. The student stretched out his hands in front of him and shouted to the teacher that he understood. He told the students not to say anything about him offending anyone. Li swung his arm with all his might in mid-flight to hit his opponent. The fighter stood calmly under the protective dome. The student swung his arms with all his might and began to hit the protective dome with his hands in order to break through it. He noted with fear to himself that the guy's strength had suddenly increased. Shai stretched out his two hands in front of him. He told the fighter that they were still just warming up, and now it was time for the real fight. Lee strained with all his might. He swung his arm wide to try to break through the barrier. He said in an angry voice to the student who ran up that he would not be able to break his barrier. C looked ahead in fear. He noticed how his protective dome had cracked. Lee hit the fighter in the face with all his might in mid-flight. He was able to break through the protective dome. Beaten, he fell to the ground. He told himself that the students had been very weak before. The main character was warming up his hands. He told the fighter in a stern voice not to give up so easily. It was not the end yet. Surprised, he came to his senses and sat down on the ground. He looked ahead with fear. Chang swung his arm with all his might and hit the surprised Zai in the stomach. The surprised warrior received a very powerful blow to the side of his head from the stone monster with all his might. A bright bolt of lightning struck from above. It pierced and struck her from head to toe. After a general attack from the students, he lost consciousness and fell dead to the ground. Fan looked at the student's body lying on the ground. He asked his friends, "Did they go too far?" Xiu extended a small needle and touched the fighter's body. Ting shouted at the students in a disgruntled voice that they should be more worried about their class breaking up. The main character headed towards the exit. He told the students that they needed to go home. There was a chew lying on the ground in the street. The main character thought about it and decided to himself that he had forgotten something. He just couldn't remember what exactly. Principal Shan sat in his office and studied the new student's document. He was surprised that a student from Class S was transferred to him. The man was sitting at the table and studying the document. He said in a satisfied voice that now he would have happiness on his face. The beaten student walked through the door. He asked the man if he was the manager of the academy named Kai Shan. The director in the chair asked the disgruntled guest why he dared to name him. The beaten student told the principal that his name was Sei, and that he came here on the orders of the school. The director studied the student's document in front of him for a long time. In silence and carefully, Sean smiled at the guest and asked the guy what happened to his face. He turned to the side and explained to the man that he had only fallen down the stairs. The principal jumped to his feet. He asked the boy if he wanted to take him on a tour of the school. He asked the man in a dissatisfied voice if he could choose a class for himself. Sean shouted from behind to the guy that he could choose any class he wanted. The student walked out of the office very quickly and slammed the door behind him. The director watched him silently. Shan called and told his subordinate not to send the student back to him. A student in Class S can choose any class he wants. The principal hung up the phone. He said in a joyful voice that he had recruited a good student and fired a good-for-nothing teacher. The worker at the desk handed the protagonist a stack of documents. He told the Fenya that the evacuation would be disbanded soon anyway. The students needed to be given questionnaires. The protagonist tore up a stack of documents. He told the man in a stern voice that their class would never disband. The man said to Fenya in a dissatisfied voice that no one but idiots would get into his class. Sei came in from the side and said that he wanted to join Fenya's class. The worker looked angrily ahead and said that the transferred student genius SE was standing in front of him. The man stood up. He told the guest that Fan was the worst teacher in the academy and his class was the weakest. He advised the boy to go to Class S. The student reminded the worker that he could choose the class he wanted. He wanted to go to Fenya. The main character told the student in a dissatisfied voice that he didn't want to take him. The man asked Fenya in surprise, "Is he really refusing the student?" C told the main character that his class needed one more person. Otherwise, the class would be disbanded. Fen once again refused to take the student. The fan looked at the guy with interest and said that he could teach him to turn his abilities into an attack. He asked his partner with excitement what he could do to get him to accept him. The fan demanded that the guy call him Mr. Ningen asked him for acceptance. He asked Mr. Ning in a submissive voice to accept him into the class. The protagonist demanded that the student call him the Almighty Mr. Ning. Sei obediently called Fanya the Almighty Mr. and asked to go to class. Fan demanded that his partner call himself humble and stupid and asked to go to class. C completely repeated the words that the main character demanded of him. The fan demanded that the student ask him again. The man on the side looked at all this in surprise. The main character slowly ate a small sandwich and walked up to the school board. The fan looked closely at the students from his seat and said that they were starting the lesson. Shan pointed angrily to the side and asked the protagonist why he was in a class that had been disbanded. He demanded that the teacher pack his things and write a resignation letter. Lee asked in a frightened voice, "Is this really the end of everything?" She said in a sad voice that they had finally met a teacher like Mr. Ning. Xu looked at her teacher with great surprise and interest. She waited for what he would say next. The fan calmly answered the director that his class was already full and could not be dismissed. Shan asked his partner in surprise, who would want to go to his class? Fan calmly explained to his partner that a student named Zi Tiange wanted to join his class. The director laughed very evilly. He shouted at the main character that he was joking. The director asked him in surprise, did he really decide to go to such a lousy class? Shan was very surprised when he saw the guy next to him stand up on his feet near the table. Tin looked at the guy with great excitement and surprise and shouted that it was him. The fan angrily demanded that the student leave the classroom and then enter with permission. He approached the exit. Then he stood in the classroom door and asked permission to go inside. The fan calmly told the student that he could go inside. Shan ran up to the student in fear and promised that he could transfer him to Class S. The guy answered the director that he wanted to stay in that class. A worker came up from the side with a document in his hands. He told the student that he had made a student ID for him. The director grabbed his subordinate by the throat and began to strangle him. He sternly asked his partner why he had not informed him that he had transferred to the main character's class. The employee, in a choking voice, answered the director that he had not asked him to report which class he would be going to. The main character told the man in a displeased voice that he needed to teach a lesson. The director looked at the guy from the side with displeasure and said that he had not finished yet. The fan answered the men in an angry voice that he would keep them company another time. The subordinate angrily asked the director what they should do now. Sean turned around and shouted in an angry voice to the side that they needed to call the finance director here. The main character walked accompanied by his students. Above them, a Chu hovered in the air. Tin pointed her finger at the new student with displeasure and asked why he had joined the class. C turned around and explained to the girl that thanks to him, their class had not been disbanded. The students looked at the new student with anger and displeasure. They stuck out their tongues at him. The main character told his friends that they would be classmates and should work together. Fan stepped forward and looked straight ahead. The protagonist looked closely at the broken dome. He said in a thoughtful voice that, if the enemy attacks this place, it will be easy. Fan extended his hand forward with 2 fingers and told the student that he could use the double barrier. The protagonist explained to the student that he could use a regular barrier to protect himself. The second dome was needed to protect the weak part of the barrier. Zhang happily told the protagonist that only he could have thought of such a thing. A joyful Shu stood nearby. C told the main character that all this would entail a change in the structure of the barrier. He didn't know if he could do all this. Fan confidently told his partner that he could do everything. The student shouted with a joyful and confident voice that he would try. A dome appeared around him. He stood with his eyes closed. Another protective barrier appeared on top of his large dome. The student looked ahead with a joyful voice and shouted that he did it. Flying Chu told the girl to try attacking the guy. Ting warmed up her hands and said that she would do it with pleasure. The girl created a huge stone monster. The golem prepared to attack. The stone monster launched a huge stone spear at his opponent. The stone spear hit the protective dome and shattered into small pieces. The student inside was unharmed. Tin was very unpleasantly surprised that her spear did not pierce the dome. The main character joyfully looked ahead and shouted that it finally worked. He shouted in a joyful voice that he was now the best in the class. The frightened girl fell to her knees. C told the student in an angry voice that there was no need to be proud of the fact that she was the strongest. Tin angrily shouted at the guy that he was going to die now. The student confidently demanded from the teacher to make him stronger. He wanted to overcome the whole school, and even those in Class S. The main character told the student in a joyful voice that he still had a lot of studying to do. Fan stood in front of the students. He told them that he would now teach them all. The teacher told the students that they must now complete the first degree and must become stronger than Class A. Fan shouted at the students in an angry voice that they must become improved. The students looked at the teacher in surprise. They gave him 55 trust points. Fan pointed his finger at the frightened student Zhang and shouted that they would start with him. The main character looked at the student and in a joyful voice promised to heal him from his injury. The main character told all the students that they were free for today. The teacher told Zhang that they would see him tomorrow. The man sat at the head of the table. The other participants of the meeting sat at the table nearby. Long told his partners that they had all heard of Ning Fan. The man said that Fan was fighting against the teachers of Class S. Ji said in a dissatisfied voice that the director was already tired of the main character. The Ruo woman turned around and asked Long, "Did he really call them because of Ning Fan?" The teacher said in a stern voice that the main character would be punished. "Now is the best time to unite with the director of the MA." He said in a dissatisfied voice that it might be very late if they started now. Long looked angrily ahead and told his teammates that he had an idea. Long turned around and looked at the other participants in the meeting. He wanted to tell about the students. The protagonist entered the building and collapsed on the bed. He told himself that he was comfortable, but there would be a lot of work later. Fan jumped up on the bed. He realized that he had to improve his level. He hadn't studied the mad teacher system for a long time. The main character happily looked at his reflection in the mirror. He decided to take a good look at himself. Fan looked closely at his reflection in the mirror. He activated the eye of the master on himself. Ruo looked angrily at the student and demanded that she transfer to her class. She explained that Fan would not be able to teach her anything. The girl named Liu Min said in an angry voice that if she were Fan, her conscience would not allow her to stay in this school. The main character told his partners in an angry voice that everyone who said such words to him was already in the hospital. Ruo looked at the main character very angrily. Fan looked at her intently in response. The woman told the guy that he had not yet recovered. She realized that she had overestimated him. Ruo thought to herself that whoever harmed Nigfanu would remain a legend. The protagonist looked at the woman with suspicion. He couldn't understand when she determined that he had not yet recovered. Sue shouted in a dissatisfied voice that they had become better, thanks to the teacher. She did not want to allow him to be insulted. Min looked sternly at the student and suggested that she fight her. The main character put his hand on his student's head. He said that no one is afraid of mines. The main character looked at the girl with his magical vision. He saw that she had some courage. Fan leaned over to the student and whispered something in her ear. Shu listened to him attentively. Two girls stood opposite each other and prepared to fight. There were a lot of other students around. Min put both hands in front of her and screamed loudly. She prepared to attack. A bright lightning bolt suddenly appeared on the student's side. She looked away in fear. A very bright lightning struck from above. Mines flew far to the side after a powerful attack. Ruo was very unhappy. She did not understand how this happened. Min, after the flight, she fell from above on a group of students. The beaten student lay on the ground. She said in a cheerful voice that her rival was very fast. Shu was very scared. She looked away at the woman with excitement. A bright red aura appeared around Ruo. She angrily told the guy that she underestimated his students. The main character looked angrily at the woman. He prepared to fight off her attack. The woman suddenly jumped up and ran forward. There was a red fire near her hand. She shouted to the guy that she still doesn't know the limits of his strength. The fan looked at his running rival with displeasure. He decided that she was making fun of him. Shu happily thought to herself that her teacher had a very fast destruction spell. Everything should be fine. The main character looked to the side and noticed that the girl had given him 10 trust points. The fan looked angrily at the woman and told her that he now had enough time to make his move. The main character raised his hands above his head, and there was a yellow glow above them. The woman activated the 6th level fire magic on the move. Fan launched the fire of the flaming heavens against his rival. Lightning struck the woman in the head. Ruo was very surprised. She stood there badly burned and shocked. The fan told the woman in a displeased voice that if she didn't agree with something, it meant she didn't know enough to understand it. The woman got very angry. She grabbed her head with her hands and prepared to attack the guy further. Ruo swung her burning hand and shouted at the protagonist that he was still very confident. The woman launched a huge fireball. A frightened she stood in front of her. Fan jumped forward to protect the student from the fireball. The guy thought to himself in fear that he didn't have enough trust points left. A ball of fire hit the main character with all its might. There was a very bright explosion. Gradually, the smoke from the explosion began to clear. After that, 2 silhouettes appeared. Shu looked at her teacher with great fear. The protagonist felt that he had gained enough trust points. The woman was very angry. She couldn't understand how the main character could still survive. The fan glared at his rival. He shouted at the woman for daring to attack his student. The main character summoned several magical assistants to himself with the help of magic. These were the werewolf and the deity's heavenly lightning. The magical demons rushed forward as a group towards the frightened woman. The girl came up to the teacher from the side and thanked him. At this time, predatory monsters were finishing off Ruo nearby. Fan patted the student on the head and said that a person who could bully his students had not yet been born. At this time, someone from the side suddenly called out to Xu Wei. A guy named Zhang ran up. He asked the girl with excitement if everything was okay with her. Sue answered her friend in a very sad voice that everything was fine with her. Min ran up to her beaten teacher and helped her to her feet. Rua turned around and looked angrily at the main character. She decided to take revenge on him. The main character turned to the guy Jang and said that he needed to go and heal his right hand. Jang asked the teacher with great interest, "Is this really possible?" The main character explained to the guy that if he said so, then it could definitely be done. Jang walked a short distance away from the teacher. Xu was standing next to Fan. The student looked at his hand and magical lightning appeared near it. He asked the teacher, "Is he really sure?" The main character told the guy that he should take the first step to make his life easier in the future. The main character told the girl that he would teach her the skill of ice destruction. She must attack the student and force him to use his right hand. Xu spread her arms to the side and an ice glow appeared next to her. Fan shouted to the students from the side that they needed to start. A frightened Jang stood and watched with excitement as icy lightning flew at him. The student raised his hands in front of him. He protected himself from the magic crystals flying at him. Jang looked next to him with great surprise. He saw snowflakes falling on him from above. The fan turned to the frightened student and asked her what she was doing. Sue explained to the teacher in a frightened voice that she did not want to harm the student. The teacher looked at the girl in surprise. Jang stood next to her, looking embarrassed. The teacher explained to the student that they were trying to help the boy restore his right arm so she wouldn't be able to help him. All the Shu attacks had to be more violent. Jang looked at the girl and said that he could do everything and she could continue. Snow crystals appeared near the student's hands. She asked the guy if he was ready. Jang shouted confidently to the girl that he was ready and she could attack. Shu very abruptly rushed forward from her place and launched magic crystals from herself. Jang stood and looked around in fear. Pieces of ice fell on him. The student clenched his fist. He decided to try to fight off the flying magic. Ice crystals flew towards the guy and began to hit him from all sides. Shu glanced at the beaten guy from the side and called out to him in fear. Jang flew to the side after her attack. A beaten student lay unconscious on the ground. A girl ran up to him from the side. Sue lifted the student off the ground with her hands. She asked him excitedly why he didn't repel her attack. The main character told his friends in a thoughtful voice that they would now have to try something else. The teacher inside Long's school class was surprised when he heard the story from the woman. He shouted that Ningfan had not recovered and could not use the new skill. Rua carefully painted her nails. She told her partners excitedly that they could try it themselves if they didn't believe her. The teacher turned and looked at his colleagues. The other men remained silent. Long looked at the paper in his hands. He said that their academy puts education and training as a priority. The school committee decided on Class D. Long turned to his colleagues and handed them the document. He said that he was passing it on to them. The teacher said in a dreamy voice that if even one student failed the test, he would be expelled. As a result, Class D would be disbanded due to a lack of students. In the medical office, Chow pointed to the student on the couch and said that she could heal him. The main character stood and silently repeated to himself the words about classes S and B. The woman reminded the teacher in a dissatisfied voice that he himself had told her to heal the patient. She sternly asked Fanya what he was waiting for. The main character carefully analyzed Chow. She was specialized in healing and erosion. The woman could use 2 types of magic. Fan looked thoughtfully ahead and thought that in front of him was the second group of the special government mage. The woman extended her hand to the patient. A green glow appeared near her. Chow held the guy's hand and looked at it carefully. Jang stood silently. The woman became very angry. She looked at the student with hatred. Chiu shouted in an angry voice that the guy had no problems. Fan held his hands near the student's head. The main character smiled slyly at the woman and said that she should play along with him. Cal reminded her partner that she was a B-level healer. The woman did not understand how she could help deceive this child. The protagonist told the woman that she could be an S-level healer. Chow asked the guy, "What does he mean?" The protagonist told the woman that she was a level S healer from the coalition of godly mutants. Cal extended her hand towards the patient, and a pink glow appeared near her. The woman asked the guy sternly, "What else does he know?" The fan answered his partner that he knows everything he needs to. Cal placed her glowing hand on the student's head. She asked the teacher how he knew. Fan waved his hand in the direction of the frightened woman. He demanded that she not bother his student. Chow swung her glowing hand. She told the guy that he had revealed her secret and she had to kill him. Fan tilted his head to the side in time. A pink lightning bolt flew past him. The main character asked the woman with displeasure, "Why does she raise her hands after a good conversation?" Chow sternly threatened the guy that very soon He would not even be able to move his lips. The woman rushed forward and tried to attack the guy with powerful blows from her hand. Chow grabbed the woman's hands with very quick and dexterous movements and shouted that she was no match for him. Fan held the woman's hand in his hands. He told her that she could keep the secret for now if she listened to him. Chow suddenly smiled at the guy and said that she would help him with his small request. The protagonist told his partner that they needed to remove the seal. Zhao was lying on the bed at the time, looking up in front of him. The protagonist told the patient on the couch that they would replace his arm. Chow explained to the student that he would be able to quickly return to level S. Zhang lay silently on the couch and looked ahead, very frightened. Tian was lying on the bed and thinking only about his hand. At that moment, the main character approached him with Chow. The young teacher said that he and Li had decided to replace his arm, and the girl noted that it would be extremely quick. A dumbfounded Zhang Yang didn't quite understand how they would manage to do this, and quickly at that. At the same time, the young cultivator asked the guy's permission, but Chow said that he was under anesthesia. Then Ning said with a smile that his silence would be considered consent, adding that his right arm no longer works properly and actually needs to be replaced. And in its place, the hand of a certain martial arts master will be installed, with which Tian will be able to become stronger. After some time, the operation was completed successfully. John looked closely at his new hand, after which he suddenly decided to test her ability to work, and clenching his fist, she sparkled with lightning. Zhang then sent a lightning strike towards the wall, which produced a powerful attack. Shocked, Li didn't expect such an incredible result as she stared at the guy, urging him not to do it again so as not to smash her office to pieces. However, turning around, the girl saw something that could not help but outrage her. Fan said with a smile that they had achieved truly unimaginable success. In fact, Tian's blow broke through the wall of the building, creating a huge hole. A stunned Zhang thanked them for installing an incredibly strong hand. Ning replied that they simply improved his brush and did not replace it, so that he would believe in himself. The young man even burst into tears, asking again if this was really true. Fan responded positively, saying that he needed to put in maximum effort to become even stronger. Naturally, Zhang promised that he would try his best, and the teacher encouraged him to go to class. At the same time, Ning said that she shouldn't be so upset about the destroyed wall, because the main thing was that they helped the student. Chow agreed with him, saying that she was extremely happy about Yan's recovery, after which they finally left for class, but in reality, Li was upset. Meanwhile, Liu Hui came to the director of the academy. Of course, Shan was glad to see him. The extremely self-confident Bei said that he would definitely put this upstart fan in his place. Mada thanked him for his help, saying that he would never forget this favor. Their conversation was overheard by Shui, who was standing outside the director's office door, realizing that her ex-husband was in trouble again. At this moment, Ruo discovered her and called out to the girl, which Shiyu did not expect at all. Yunxi asked what she was doing here and what she wanted to talk to the director about. The next day, Shi and Li saw an advertisement about a new test. They began to understand that they were clearly not capable of passing such an exam, and their rating would become even lower. Feng, in turn, noted that this ridiculous class constantly tired him. Yitian suddenly said that this test should be extremely difficult. As a result, another quarrel broke out between them, where they began to sort things out. Tin watched silently, thinking about Nina since he never showed up. At that moment, the door suddenly opened and the main character entered the auditorium with Tian. The young master found that all the students were there, and this made him happy. The young cultivator immediately moved towards the board, where he found a certain notice, which spoke about the mandatory passing of an exam, which was extremely unexpected. V noted that most likely this is because of the incident with the teachers, and now they want to test them. Tin also stated that Fan needed to prepare the class for this test. Meanwhile, Ruo continued to ask Shui why she needed the director. The girl smiled sweetly and replied that she was actually just passing by. At the same time, Yunxi was interested in when President Shi planned to return from Luoying Academy. Yushuk said that he was indeed participating in the competition this year and it would take some time. At that moment, Hui came out of Shan's office and the girls literally froze in place. Bei smiled wryly and remarked that this was an incredible coincidence. However, Zai immediately hurried away, saying that she had too much to do today. Oddly enough, Ruo also headed in the opposite direction. The finance director could not understand what had happened and why they were unhappy with his company. Soon, Shai went to Mada and told him that Ning had still not recovered. But Shan noticed that not long ago he beat up the teacher of Class C and bragged about his abilities. Yun looked at the academy director with bewilderment. hastening to convince him otherwise. Claiming that she had checked it with her royal eyes, there could be no mistake. Extremely puzzled, Da asked her what they should do now. Rua replied that she had asked Long to assist them, and that he would also check on Fan soon. At this time, the protagonist led his students to the training ground, where they were unexpectedly met by Hui. The director of the financial department noted that he had not seen the young teacher for quite a long time. The young cultivator also greeted the extremely stupid Bei, realizing that he was here for a reason. Suddenly, the old man asked if Ning wanted to use the gym, adding that if so, then, unfortunately, it is impossible to do this, since all the equipment is under repair. Ting couldn't stand it any longer and pushed Hui away, demanding that he stay out of the way. Then, going inside, she asked why everyone else could use the training room and they couldn't. Bei replied that they only use exercise equipment that doesn't need repair. He also urged Fan to teach his students manners, and Ning's small salary would not be enough to compensate for the damage caused by the equipment breakdown, after which he simply closed the doors of the gym in front of them, which was an extremely impudent act. The teacher understood that if there were no value of trust, he would have been crippled long ago. Hu suddenly suggested to the teacher that he conduct a theory lesson instead of training. Fan realized with horror that his class would also be tested on theory lessons. Li and Feng realized that Ning really didn't know anything, and at this rate, they would soon be kicked out of the academy. Tin noted that such a great man as he was obliged to know about everything and take measures. The guy tried to explain everything, but at that moment, Zhu suddenly appeared. The girl assured him that she would help him solve the problem with the training room. Fan recognized her as the ex-wife of his body's owner, assuming that she could really help them. Li Xiu, in turn, remembered that this was the same legendary she. Feng urged him to calm down. Ting was extremely outraged by the behavior of both Sui and her teacher. The extremely kind Yu said that if Fan needed her help, he could always turn to her. Suddenly, the teacher came up to her and said that she should come to his house that evening, adding that it was to help his students with a theoretical assignment. At this, the smug Ning broke into a smile, and naturally she agreed. Then Fan called all his charges to his home, since they would have a special training session tomorrow. The teacher strongly recommended that everyone not miss classes, because soon they will need to pass an exam to stay at the academy. The main character, in turn, decided to see how many trust points he had at his disposal. After learning that he had 110 points, the young master wanted to increase his awakening. Thus, the young cultivator improved this attribute by 1%. Naturally, he immediately decided to test how much his abilities would improve. Because of this, Ning used the flame skill, which didn't become much stronger. A puzzled Fan couldn't understand why the improvement was so small. The teenager then headed to the meeting place, believing that his students had already arrived. Seeing Zietian and Wei, who arrived in a minibus, the teacher became indignant, saying that, in fact, they were not going to a picnic today, but to train. However, Ting said that it would actually be nice to have a snack. As a result, she started making barbecue, which made Ning furious. Shilu, in turn, hurried to cut vegetables. Fan was literally seething with anger. Soon, almost everything was ready. The teacher could not influence his students in any way. Liu and Feng continued preparing for the picnic, ignoring the teacher's anger. Hu hoped that at least Wei and Zhang had already practiced, but they also decided to help the others and made fruit ice with the help of magic. Finally, Ning could stand it no longer and ordered them to start training and put off their picnic. However, at that moment, Sui approached him, and the girl immediately apologized for being late, adding that she bought him his favorite milk tea. Fan was shocked. Unexpectedly, the guy happily agreed to have lunch and then start training. Suddenly, Yushi called out to the young man and told him some rather unusual news. Having declared that their marriage was finally officially dissolved, a stunned Ning asked her again. The girl smiled and said that there was nothing to worry about and that he shouldn't worry about it so much. Zhu also asked the teenager not to make a scene so as not to create problems. Fan, of course, agreed with her, saying that everything was fine and he would not cause her any trouble. The young man himself could not understand what she was talking about, because he was already trying not to stick his neck out unnecessarily. After which he decided to move on to training and began to explain to the students about self-training, adding that they would also have to study the theory of this training. Of course, everyone agreed. Tiangi, in turn, demonstrated a certain popular device, where you need to open the box to release a furious magical attack. Also, magic flows into the one who uses the receiver. At that moment, he puts this device on his head, adding that if this device was used, their protective magic would be indestructible. The embittered protagonist immediately slapped him on the back of the head, and the receiver flew off his head. At the same time, the young master declared that this device was useless, and Z hastened to refute his words. The young cultivator asked if it could really teach him how to attack, but the boy remained silent. Ning told Chu that this time he would teach him how to land properly, after which Fan flew into the air and said that in order to learn magical flight, he needed to be calm. However, the self-confident Feng said that defensive magic had nothing to do with flight. The guy decided to show him a visual refutation of his words. As a result, he landed literally a few centimeters away from it, thus creating an emergency landing and telling him that he should listen to his words. A moment later, Ning cast a protective barrier, stating that as long as he used defensive magic when landing, he would not be injured. A shocked Chu noted that this was truly an amazing result. Fan also called on Tianxia to control the equipment's attack to help them master defensive magic. Ji also explained that the protective shell was an extension of internal strength, and he simply needed to defend himself. The young man put on the receiver and said that he understood everything, and they could begin. C instantly pressed the button on the remote control, and a crystal flew out of the metal box. A few seconds later, lightning-fast attacks rushed towards Feng, who did not expect such speed. Chu subsequently used a magical barrier to block the attack, after which he began to dodge the electric discharges, which he did not do very well. And a moment later, the protective sphere cracked, but the stubborn Feng continued his flight. The teenager understood perfectly well that at any moment the shell could fall apart. However, despite this, the self-confident student continued to float in the air, and suddenly an explosion thundered. As a result, Chu began to free fall to the ground. Everyone was terrified. Tian, in turn, helped him land more or less successfully. Fan, however, said in a businesslike manner that only in a real fight could they become stronger. Then he told Xu and Xi that they were next in line and that they should get ready. But the guys continued to look at the main character in fear, who repeated his demand again. Feng and Li stood in place, as if they were afraid to even move. The young master insisted on his own. It is said that mental erosion magic is used to control people, but Xu needs to train to improve his control. At this moment, Xu offered him a piece of meat to increase energy. The young cultivator immediately took it, after which he stated that he also needed to learn some ways to develop spiritual strength. Feng immediately took another piece of meat from his classmate and ate it, urging his friend to listen to the teacher. But Li was not going to put up with this and began to insult Shai, saying that he had stolen his piece of chicken. The guy, in turn, urged him to calm down, but the young man continued to behave inappropriately. In the end, he attacked him with his fists, once again repeating that Feng had taken the meat. At this time, Xu literally burst into flames with spiritual energy, and the teacher hastened to stop their misunderstanding, calling on his students to stop fighting, especially over some piece of meat, adding that he knows exactly what aspects they need to train. At this moment, the teacher whispered something into the bewildered Xu's ear, who, in turn, immediately rushed to fulfill the demand of his mentor. Feng began to concentrate his spiritual energy. Fan noted that he learned this quite quickly. She found himself thinking that he really did feel an incredible surge of strength. However, the boy completely forgot about his teacher's request. As a result, he fell to the ground, and the stunned Ning could not understand what had happened. In this regard, Fan immediately ran up to him, but Feng assured him that everything was fine, and he had simply forgotten about some exercises. Then, Ning began to tell him once again about the methods of developing spiritual power. He also urged him to go and rest, then ordered Xu to begin practicing. But the teenager said he was extremely concerned about the condition of the tired Shai, who was lying on the ground, and so he offered to help him and wait until his classmate regained his strength. Fan reminded him that he should follow the new method to feel the upliftment of his soul, and only then would he be able to pass the test. Li immediately fell to his knees, begging to be taught everything. The teacher ordered that to do this, he should moderate his appetite and eat less. Xu promised that he would finish eating now and start training. Ning immediately took the meat from him. He said that after 10 circles he would be able to eat meat, but until that time he was forbidden to eat. After which Fan calmly began to eat his meat with pleasure, from which Li literally began to cry, asking his mentor not to do this. But in the end, the student naturally went to run cross-country. At this moment, the main character noticed Tin, who was reading a certain book. A stunned Vei saw the young master and asked what he was doing here. The young cultivator noted that she had been studying the summoner technique for so long, and it was time to move on to summoning life. A puzzled Tin asked what kind of ability this was. As she had never heard of such a skill, Ning replied that this technique would help improve her summoning monster and help it evolve faster. The girl thought about it, realizing that she would really need this ability then. Fan also said that each cultivator has a unique life-summoning monster. At that moment, the guy summoned his demon with a scythe, who instantly appeared behind him. After demonstrating his incredible skills, the teenager asked her if she wanted to learn the same. Suddenly, Tin declared that it was nothing to her, as if she was specifically intending to devalue his efforts. But Ning insisted that she learn this technique, because after that she also needed to learn the call of life. Then the stubborn Vei finally began to follow her mentor's method, starting to try to use such an incredible ability of the teacher. In connection with this, she asked to create a huge dragon, but something went wrong. Blinding rays of light began to diverge in different directions from the golden sphere, and a moment later, Tin was holding a small chicken in her arms, which was quite strange. As a result, she angrily threw it straight towards the bewildered Fan. Ning, in turn, noted that in fact the food of the summoned monster is its aura. But the chick immediately returned to her and began to actively jump on her head. Vi began to wave her arms, trying to drive away the persistent chicken, but she was unsuccessful, and he ended up chewing out a chunk of hair on her head, which of course pissed her off. Tin began to chase the chick away more aggressively, but still did not achieve the desired result, after which she began to run after him, intending to catch and kill such a persistent chicken. At this moment, Tiange called his mentor and said that Feng had already learned defense, so it was finally time to teach him the attack technique, Ning thought. The next day at Hoshang, the protagonist continued to teach his students. The young master hastened to announce that today they would study the theory of history. At this moment, Li suddenly rushed towards the young cultivator, and within a few seconds he ate the piece of meat that was in Nin's hands, leaving him with only a bone. Also suddenly, the chicken V rushed towards him, which made Fan extremely surprised. Turning around, the guy saw Tin in a hood and asked why she put it on. As soon as the chick saw his angry mistress, he jumped on her head, after which he tried to break through her hood to eat a couple more locks of hair. In connection with this, she tore off one hair and hurried to feed it to her pet. The chick ate it with great pleasure and calmed down for a while. Fan was stunned by the little creature's appetite, not understanding how it could fit so much. An embittered V stated that if she had known how the technology would make her lose her hair, she would not have agreed to study it. Ning sighed heavily and said that while she was undergoing the evaluation, he would help her, after which he tried to remember the name of the plant that promotes hair growth. Suddenly, he noticed his ex-wife. The girl was literally a couple of meters away from him. Naturally, Zhui also saw Fan and looked at him with her mysterious gaze. Then he thought, because she might know this plant for hair growth. Yuxi in turn asked what the problem was and why he looked so puzzled. Ning decided to take advantage of the moment and asked her if she knew about a plant for hair growth. The girl replied that there was one such flower, and she even knew where it was. However, it is an extremely dangerous place in a cave, where a bloodthirsty monster guards it. She immediately informed her ex-husband about this and urged him not to go there. But Fan was not at all afraid, but on the contrary, he declared that it was good. In connection with this, he asked if she would take him to that cave. Zhui answered positively, but at the same time, she asked him for some favor where she needed help. The puzzled guy replied that he would be happy to help her with whatever she asked him to do. Then she told him exactly what she needed help with, and Ning took off his outerwear. The students, in turn, were simply stunned, not understanding what she was doing. Yuxi began to point out the meridians on the teacher's body that each of them should understand. Fan himself was perplexed, assuming that she simply wanted to make fun of him. Soon the protagonist led his exhausted students back to the academy. Long suddenly saw the young master and noticed that he had arrived too early, adding that it wouldn't help him anyway, since if the students didn't pass the test, he would be fired. Extremely indignant, Tian objected, demonstrating his excessive decisiveness. But the young cultivator urged him to calm down immediately, assuring him that he would definitely pass the exam, realizing that if he had enough points of support, he would take care of it. At this moment, Ruo suddenly appeared and demanded that all the students follow her to the test task. Ning began to tell his charges that they would succeed and pass the exam. Zhang watched the proceedings, naively believing that this time his class would definitely be disgraced. Soon all the students entered the classroom, where Yun Shi began to hand out the most difficult assignments. After which she said that the test had begun, everyone immediately tensed up, realizing what kind of hell awaited them. A frightened Tian quietly said that they definitely wouldn't be able to pass this exam. After reading the assignments, Lee also couldn't understand why they were so difficult. Feng gave up completely, saying that they were doomed to failure and that nothing would work out for them. Suddenly, Ruo walked up to him. She instantly sat up straight and looked at the teacher. Yun noted that no one was allowed to talk during the exam. He added that cheating is also prohibited, and anyone caught doing so will automatically receive a 0 mark. Fan, in turn, stood outside the classroom door, hoping that his students would pass the test. After a certain amount of time, Ruo informed everyone that the exam was over and they had to hand in their work. Long immediately approached Ning and said in a businesslike manner that they would now find out the grades of his students. A moment later, Yunshi came out of the classroom, and Zhang hurried to find out the test result. Having snatched the report card with the students' marks from her hands, he discovered a shocking picture, where absolutely all of Fan's minions received satisfactory grades. The teacher noted that his students were really smart and were able to cope. An angry Long immediately crumpled the piece of paper and declared that they had not passed the exam honestly. Naturally, Ning hastened to object, saying that he was next to him and could not see the test being taken. Jiang Wen could not control himself and continued to aggressively claim the opposite, after which he suddenly left, declaring that they would definitely be defeated at the training ground. Fan turned to his students and asked if they were sure they had not cheated. Everyone said that they had passed the exam on their own and would never have done that to their teacher. The guy breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that they had successfully overcome half of the obstacles. Soon, the main character headed with his class to the testing ground. The young master, in turn, noted that this track was completely unsuitable for Class D. Tian suddenly said that this actually shouldn't be a problem for Chu. Meanwhile, Teacher Guan arrived at the academy, and a puzzled Zhang asked what he was doing there. Yuan replied that he would like to take a look at the students, especially since he would be obliged to teach them in the future. Long then suggested that he observe Ning's class, thinking that his students would be embarrassed, and Liu, of course, agreed. The young cultivator understood perfectly well that this track was too difficult to pass. Unexpectedly, Feng asked the teacher if he knew this man. Fan responded negatively, adding that he had to concentrate on the track and the score. Zhang, in turn, urged the participants of the race and explained the rules, where it was necessary to reach the finish line faster than the others. There were also some paint spheres on the track that exploded when touched, after which Long Wen started the countdown to the start of the race. Everyone got ready. Naturally, the class supported Chu as best they could, while Feng was maximally focused on the road. Suddenly, he turned his attention to his extremely impudent and self-confident opponent, who constantly egged him on and insisted that the boy had no place here. Chu, in turn, was absolutely confident in himself and ignored the enemy's provocations. But when the race started, Ming immediately pulled ahead. Feng was shocked by such speed. Then he began to catch up with him, realizing that he had no right to lose. Zheng once again began to mock the guy, saying that it would be better if he went home. However, after a couple of seconds, the teenager confidently caught up with him, and his opponent was in shock. Then Ming came up with an extremely vile plan, and he hastened to put it into practice. Hitting the paint spheres, he rushed forward at lightning speed, shouting that he had prepared a gift for him. At that moment, the balls burst and paint flew out of them, which detained Chu. The enraged fan declared that he was playing unfairly and that he had done it on purpose, but no one paid any attention to him. Meanwhile, Feng was covered in paint, which made him even more angry, and the enemy was incredibly fast, and he kept calling him a weakling, saying that he would never win this race. Despite his setbacks, Chu was confidently flying towards victory, trying to overtake Ming. At the same time, the kid kept moving away from the spheres with paints, but he wasn't very good at it. Because the enemy touched absolutely all the balls to slow down Feng's movement, the angry Ting couldn't stand it any longer and shouted that Zheng was constantly touching the spheres. However, Long said it was no big deal because he wasn't spraying paint. At a certain point, Chu finally pulled ahead, overtaking the naive Min, saying that he is considered the worst in the class, but Zheng is even worse since he can't win the race, which naturally only provoked his opponent, who began to interfere with him once again. Launching his magical attack at Feng in the form of several lightning beams, Chu understood that it would be quite difficult to dodge them and remembered Ning's technique. As a result, an explosion occurred on the track, and everyone was shocked by what was happening. Teacher Min was sure that the race was over and the student had lost. However, in the clearing fog, he suddenly saw the silhouette of a teenager, who in turn was under a protective barrier. Zheng was in shock. Fan stated that the teacher attacked the student, and this was clearly not according to the rules of the race. But Jiang Wen said that as long as they were on the track, They were allowed to do anything. Ning, extremely indignant, asked if even if the paint stained the shield, it would still count. Long, smiling mischievously, answered positively, which only angered Fan. The young teacher immediately headed towards Jiang to discuss what was happening. It was only after some time that V noticed his absence and wondered where he had gone. At this time, Ning threw Wen out of the chair and said to his disciple. Everyone was shocked. Fan urged Chu to act without rules, as Long himself had said so. In connection with this, even causing damage was allowed on the track. Feng was surprised. The teacher demanded that the student demonstrate his emergency landing to Minnie. Chu immediately began to carry out his patron's order and rushed towards Zeng, who, in turn, did not expect such a brave step from the young man. Feng began to pursue the teacher Ming, who was running away from him. However, the student clearly surpassed the teacher in speed and easily caught up with him. After which, being in the magical barrier, he hurried to attack the frightened Zeng. Everything happened too quickly, and he naturally had nowhere to go. As a result, the completely unharmed Chu literally walked across Ming, and just a couple of seconds later he happily crossed the finish line, thereby winning the race. Feng's classmates were genuinely happy about his victory, realizing that he had finally succeeded. She and Li couldn't contain their emotions and started shouting the winner's name throughout the entire training ground. The main character was also happy with this outcome and sighed with relief. But the embittered Long angrily said that he had won unfairly and had even attempted on the teacher's life. Then the young master reminded him of how he said that there were no rules on the track. Jiang Wen began to make extremely ridiculous denials. Realizing that he had actually said that, the young cultivator literally lost his temper and demonstrated his strength. Suddenly, Gon called for him to stop, adding that his student had indeed won fairly. This puzzled Long, but he did not dare to contradict the great Yuan, who called on him to acknowledge the young man's victory and said that he was the first to cross the finish line. Then he noted that Ning was able to raise a good student, and his class should receive the highest C degree. But Liu hinted that this was just the beginning and that Fan would have to try hard. Jiang stated that since he had passed the assessment, no one would bother him anymore. However, in this case, it was necessary to move on to a new test. The teacher happily agreed, and soon Van announced the qualifying round, calling on all participants to get ready. Shu suddenly raised his trembling hand up, and the teacher was surprised. Li, in turn, volunteered to take the test first, as he could not wait any longer. Ning, of course, allowed him to try his luck, believing that the student would be able to pass the exam, hoping that he will soon be able to achieve the much-needed result. So the next test took place in the ring, where Lei set about testing Li. The protagonist called Shu to crouch when Fei hits him for 10 seconds, and then get up and attack him. Long demanded that the teacher deal with this student as soon as possible, adding that it is extremely important to win this round, as a lot depends on it. However, Lei confidently said that he would follow the exam rules, after which the participants took their positions and the evaluation finally began. Fei noted that the young man was unable to pass the test, and that it was better for him to go home. But Li asked him to finish the test quickly because he was very hungry, which naturally only enraged the teacher, and he immediately attacked the student. However, at the moment of impact, Shu abruptly crouched down and began counting 10 seconds. A puzzled Lei asked what he was doing and why he was transferring the test to the circus. The young man ignored the teacher's questions, continuing to count the seconds, which of course managed to anger Fei, who once again tried to hit him. But 10 seconds later, Li stood up abruptly, thereby once again dodging the attack, after which he hastened to deal a crushing blow to the teacher, who in turn did not have time to dodge. Thus, Shu literally knocked him out, which no one expected from the student. Lei, meanwhile, simply flew into the stands, breaking through them with his body. Long was in shock. Fei was stunned and couldn't understand where this child got such unimaginable strength from. An enraged Jiang Wen called on the teacher to immediately stand up and continue grading. But the defeated teacher said that he knew his limits very well, adding that he agreed with the defeat and thus the victory went to Shu. Long was furious, but, as before, he could do nothing to influence the situation. An ecstatic Shai began shouting that his classmate Li had finally won. He then offered him a chicken leg, knowing that his friend would not refuse such a surprise. The guy, in turn, instantly perked up at the sight of the delicious and fresh meat. As a result, he immediately rushed towards Feng to quickly take away the shin. She barely managed to run to the side, calling on Shu to calm down, because he had already won. But the unstoppable little boy continued to chase him, not seeing any obstacles in his path. After a certain amount of time, Lee finally caught up and took the piece of meat from Feng. She kept telling him that he shouldn't be so aggressive. At that moment, the loudspeaker announced the next participants in the test, and Feng was one of them. Long, in turn, called on teacher Ji to teach this upstart a lesson, promising that he would become a better teacher. Jing said that he would do everything possible to ensure that the boy lost, because it was in his own interests. After a few seconds, the evaluation began successfully. She was noticeably nervous. Ji, on the contrary, was absolutely confident in his abilities and urged his student to prepare. At that moment, he used some magic, and the room suddenly became dark. Ven was looking forward to a quick victory for his henchman, as he had an incredible level of skill. Ting began to understand that Feng would not win this round, since he was up against the best teacher in the academy. Zheng continued to taunt Shai, directing his magical attacks at him. Suddenly, a dark sphere appeared and instantly flew into the stunned student. Feng simply didn't know what to do or how to counter his teacher's incredible abilities. The dark matter had actually weakened Shai considerably, and he didn't understand how to counter it. After which Ji used flame magic and summoned firestones. Then, with complete nonchalance, he directed them towards the frightened teenager. A shocked Feng began to run away from the boulders that exploded behind him. Of course, she realized that hiding was not the best option, and it was necessary to develop at least some kind of tactics. But to do this, it was necessary to find the teacher's weak spot and wait for the right moment. After a certain amount of time, the guy finally attacked him, but Zheng instantly brought all his efforts to naught. She then decided to distract the teacher so that he could strike, but just as he thought about it, Ji used another ability. As a result, he created several copies of himself, and Feng did not know where the real Zheng was. Meanwhile, the teacher continued to enjoy what was happening and surprised Shai. This time, he directed numerous ice arrows at the guy, who had no way to dodge the attack. Thus, they literally pierced the student's body, and he fell to the ground. Ji laughed again, saying that it was quite a funny fight, after which he declared that it was time to finish the evaluation and again summoned the dark monster, who instantly rushed towards Feng, intending to attack him. The demon's huge hand was approaching Shi, but he was not going to give up. Concentrating all his strength, the student tried to resist the teacher's power. His hands were filled with spiritual energy, and Feng was able to restrain the power of the summoned monster. A moment later, he even began to put pressure on him, which no one expected. At the same time, Shi stated that if Shu won, then he was obliged to win this round as well. After all, if they lose, their class will be disbanded. Zheng said that this is exactly what will happen soon. But Feng continued to confidently restrain the efforts of the demon Ji. The teacher clearly underestimated him. In connection with this, at a certain point he even closed his eyes, waiting for the end of the test. Meanwhile, Shi finally broke through his magical being and approached his teacher. While trying to strike him, Zheng then realized that the boy was indeed a capable student. After a couple of seconds, the monster seemed to obey Feng and rushed towards Ji, thus dealing him a crushing blow that was impossible to avoid. As a result, Zheng collapsed to the ground, suffering extremely painful damage. Long was shocked by what happened, but the main character, on the contrary, was happy about his student's victory. The young master truly believed in the strength of his protege and did not doubt him for a second. An excited Feng raised his hands up, saying that he had finally passed the test. Xu was also happy about his friend's victory, realizing that no one could disband them. An exhausted Xu approached his classmate and said that he was very tired. Unexpectedly, Li sacrificed his meat to restore Feng's strength. The young man responded by asking why Xu suddenly laughed during the evaluation. The fat man noted that until Xu declared his victory, he believed that he had lost. An enraged Tin urged them not to rejoice prematurely and to take exams more seriously in the future. Longa, in turn, was filled with hatred. He could not calmly watch the teenagers rejoice at their success. Banging his fist on the table, Zhang said testing needed to continue, adding that now everything depends on the next test, and their previous achievements do not count. Wen, in turn, urged Feng to finally deal with Ning's disciple, since his predecessors had failed to do so. The extremely self-confident Wei declared that he would gladly defeat this girl. Long then announced the next round, where teacher Feng would compete against Ting. Vi was confident in her abilities and noticed that the others were overly scared. The main character wished her luck and said that she would be able to win the teacher. Tin began to blame the young mentor for everything, reminding him of the summoning technique. Wei couldn't wait for the student to fight him in a trial match. A moment later, Vi stepped into the arena, knowing she had to take the test. As soon as the evaluation began, Tin quickly summoned her stone golems. The earth literally shook, and at that very moment the magical idols rose up. The arrogant Feng pointed out that with such a level of skill, she would be better off going home, because he intends to demonstrate to her the true power of summoning, after which the teacher released a small cloud of fire, which immediately ignited, after which a huge bear appeared and killed one of Wei's guards. The girl realized that it would be extremely difficult for her to cope with such a beast. However, she was in no hurry to give up and sent the remaining golems into mortal combat. They instantly pounced on the woolly giant, trying to immobilize him. Then they rushed to attack the bear, but this action was again unsuccessful, because Ven's furious magical beast bit off the guard's stone hand, after which he knocked over the second one. It seemed that the forces were not equal and Tin was doomed to failure. The bear literally trampled V's stone warriors, which she never expected. Feng was truly enjoying what was happening, directing the beast towards the girl. But even having lost her golems, the student was in no hurry to sound the alarm and continued the battle. Suddenly, she tore off a hair of hers, which instantly burst into flames with blue fire. A couple of seconds later, a huge monster appeared and dealt a powerful blow to the bear. Wei, stunned, couldn't believe his eyes, saying that this couldn't be happening. Tin smiled and noted that this was by no means a low level of summoning, after which she commanded her big guy to finally deal with the teacher. Fan was shocked by Wei's abilities because he didn't know that the student had learned this technique. Naturally, the main character was proud of his student, who hurried to finish the assessment. The huge demon immediately rushed towards the enraged Bear Fang. The beast also tried to attack the summoned monster, but he managed to dodge the blow, after which he himself carried out a series of ferocious attacks. Wei was simply shocked by what was happening, realizing that his advanced summoning technique was clearly inferior to his student's skills. An embittered Feng once again ordered his beast to destroy this pile of stones. Eventually, the bear was able to attack the golem and cut off its head. But even so, he continued the fight, which was extremely surprising. The summoners could only mentally support their enraged monsters. At a certain point in the battle, the advantage again shifted to Tin Wei's side. A moment later, all that was left of the bear was its skin pressed into the ground, and Wei was in shock. The girl joyfully shouted that she had finally won and that no one would touch their class now. However, Feng made a cut on his hand and said that he would now show her the true summoning. His blood flowed onto the ground and immediately turned into a huge number of snakes, who climbed onto the golem Tin, thereby trying to immobilize the big guy. Extremely worried, V ordered the monster to take its time and retreat for a while. But suddenly the snakes rose into the air, forming a kind of whirlwind, as a result of which they literally demolished the pile of stones. Soon the golem simply crumbled into cobblestones, and it seemed that the duel was over. Tin couldn't believe that she had lost the battle, so she was in no hurry to give up. Suddenly, the chick flew off her shoulder and headed towards the poisonous snakes. But the girl managed to catch him and hugged him tightly, saying that he couldn't help in any way. Ning couldn't understand why the summoned beast Wei hadn't awakened yet. Soon the snakes literally surrounded Tin, and she had nowhere to go. Fan became nervous. He understood perfectly well that if a miracle did not happen now, the test would fail. The student didn't know what to do or how to get out of the situation. Meanwhile, Feng's snakes continued their movement towards her, and Wei immediately ducked down and covered the chick. However, the chick suddenly broke free from her hands and rushed to strike the poisonous creatures. The chick eventually flew out and fell to the ground, leaving Tin in shock, saying that he was extremely stupid and should not have gotten into an unequal fight in the first place. At this moment, Wei was approaching her, in a cloud of snakes that again tried to attack the student. The enraged Tin grabbed a sharpened stone and rushed towards the teacher. When the poisonous snakes rushed towards her once again, the girl dodged, after which, Wei tried to get closer to Feng so that she could hit him. Then, finally reaching him, she stabbed the teacher in the leg with a stone. However, the result surprised her, as several snakes instantly rushed to heal the wound. They literally pierced Wei's leg, thereby immediately beginning regeneration. At the same moment, the rest of the snakes grabbed the girl by the hair and dragged her along with them. Feng noted that she was quite strong, but her zeal was not enough to win. Without thinking twice, Tin grabbed her hair with one hand and cut it off with the other using a sharpened stone. In this way, she was able to feed the chicken, which happily devoured her curls, which led to the chick's instant breakthrough, something that teacher Wei never expected. Even Wei didn't think that everything would happen exactly like this, knowing what it could lead to. The main character also understood that the magical animal would soon awaken. The chicken, in turn, continued to emit blinding streams of light, but in the end, He turned into something like a parrot, which surprised Tin and Nin. They began to think that the fight was over, because such a small chick would not be able to help in any way. The snakes in turn rushed at the chicken again, but it managed to dodge the attack and rush towards Wei. Among the club of poisonous creatures, the parrot saw the eyes of Teacher Feng. As a result, the powerful chick literally broke through several snakes. The chicken thus knocked down the arrogant teacher, and this became the turning point in the battle. Because the teacher couldn't do anything against the ordinary chick, he begged to stop the evaluation immediately, but the parrot suddenly began to peck at his head. However, Feng was unable to catch him, and the snakes did not help him in any way. As a result, the awakened chick simply pecked the teacher to death, after which he returned absolutely calmly to his joyful owner. Everyone was horrified. Long was furious and started shouting that they couldn't do anything with some students, after which Zhang saw Ruo and asked her to conduct the next round of testing. However, Dong decided to get ahead of the situation and called on Wen to give him the opportunity to conduct the exam. Long looked at him in bewilderment and asked again if he could really do it. Lei, in turn, assured that Fan's magic was on a completely different level, and he knew how to deal with him. Extremely surprised, Zhang asked what exactly he was planning to do. The teacher continued to convince him that he would shock everyone and that an accident might occur, which Wen was only glad about because he wanted to destroy the young master and his minions by any means necessary. So Long gave his approval, and Dong said that he would definitely not let him down this time. Soon, Zhang rushed to inform everyone that the next round was attack magic. Then he introduced the examiner, Lei, and the student who was to be assessed. It was Gu Wei. Sui was noticeably nervous, and the young cultivator hastened to calm her down. Having stated that she will definitely succeed, the main thing is to believe in herself and her strength, adding that she uses very little magic power, but her speed makes up for it. Suddenly, Dong interrupted their conversation, calling on the girl to finally enter the arena and fight him. As soon as Gu Wei entered the training grounds, Lei hurried to unleash a whirlwind on her. Thus, a huge tornado was approaching the young girl, but she stood still. A worried Tian urged her to immediately dodge the attack to avoid damage. However, the self-confident Shuya said that she had a completely different plan of action. As a result, she used two elements at the same time, releasing thunderous lightning and freezing rain. Gu understood perfectly well that the teacher was right and she should use spells quickly. Thus, the ice cone was enveloped in numerous lightning bolts and broke through the vortex. It was a truly spectacular performance that everyone enjoyed. An overly confident Lei said that her speed was truly impressive. However, he has something special for her. At this moment, the ground under Wei's feet began to crack at the seams. Suddenly, electric discharges summoned by Dong rushed towards her. Zhu tried to react quickly to figure out what to do and how to avoid failure. Realizing that the advantage was on his side, Lei hastened to attack the girl again. Gu Wei blocked his magical attack and instantly generated an ice structure, which he instantly directed at Dong, but he seemed to evaporate. The main character's student began to look around, not understanding where he had gone. It all happened too quickly and she couldn't follow his movements. Meanwhile, Lei found himself behind Shui and rushed into another attack. At the same time, he had something sharp in his hand that damaged the eye of Nin's young henchman. Thus, blood gushed out, and Gu Wei, in turn, did not have time to dodge. Dong continued to boast, saying that Fan clearly hadn't taught her such techniques. As a result, Sui immediately collapsed to the ground, covering her face with her hands. An enraged Tian shouted that this was against the rules and Wei definitely used a sharp weapon. However, Long said there was nothing wrong with it, and a small incident occurred. The main character immediately grabbed him by the jacket and said that this was all for a reason. After all, Zhang clearly said something to his henchman before the battle to make him cross the line. A frightened Long Wen said that he had no evidence and that he was making groundless accusations. The young master ordered him to stop this evaluation immediately. Guan, in turn, hastened to calm the young cultivator and grabbed his hand, saying that this can indeed happen sometimes during testing, adding that student Fauna is not particularly eager to give up and intends to continue the exam. Ning was stunned by this turn of events and looked at his ward, who, with a bloody eye, reported that she was able to fight, but Lei urged her to stop this senseless heroism and finally admit defeat. However, such a stubborn girl could not be convinced, and she once again said that she was ready to continue the test. Dong smiled in turn and said that in that case he had no other choice. A moment later, he pounced on her with another series of ferocious attacks. Brave Jue continued to stand up to the teacher, which was naturally worthy of respect. Suddenly, the self-confident Lei created a magical club and began to wield it. However, Gu Wei set up an ice defense in a timely manner, preventing herself from being harmed. Thus, the girl was able to block the most powerful blow from Examiner Dong, after which she released a hail of ice spikes at him, which he did not have time to dodge. The teacher, in turn, found himself surrounded by frozen fragments. In doing so, Sui literally placed an ice sphere on Lei, which was extremely satisfying to realize. Realizing that she had hit the mark, Gu Wei came a moment closer to her victory. But suddenly, Dong's frosty hand reached out to her, and the girl immediately jumped back, after which the examiner became enraged and said that he could not be defeated with such pathetic methods. Continuing his ferocious flame attacks, Lei intended to quickly finish the evaluation. Sui, in turn, understood that his fire easily melted her ice spikes. She then decided to use thunderbolts and fired one at him, but Dong had calculated everything and held back the blow. At the same time, he noted that her only strong point was the quick use of magic, but the spells themselves are of a low enough level that they cannot harm him. At this moment, he fired his magic arrows at her. Gu Wei instantly generated an ice shield, but her barrier was destroyed. The girl began to realize that she could not overcome him. Suddenly, she remembered her childhood, where her father was extremely dissatisfied with her, who stated that she had to work hard to consider herself part of their family, and with her current abilities, she has no chance of success. And this is something to think about. He also constantly decided everything for her and wanted to arrange an engagement with Zhe Yang. At this moment, Ning called on her over the loudspeaker not to give up, as he sincerely believed in victory. In connection with this, Sui immediately took up a fighting position and continued the battle. At the same time, she confidently said that she would never admit defeat. Dong, in turn, just laughed, once again declaring that she couldn't win. Gu Wei ignored him and continued to use the ice wall. An embittered Lei said that she was just wasting her time and should have given up long ago. However, the main character's student didn't even think of doing this, using another ice wall. A moment later, another magical barrier appeared in front of the teacher. Dong rushed to attack, intending to not give her the opportunity to use her skills. As a result, he literally broke through the wall and rushed towards the girl. But Zhu once again brought down a frozen barrier on him, covering him completely. Lei understood perfectly well that he would not have time to avoid this collision. He subsequently ended up right under another ice wall, but that wasn't the end of it. Dong moved slowly but steadily towards Gu Wei, who held him back with magic. The teacher tirelessly overcame obstacles and continued to slowly move towards her. At a certain point, Lei finally achieved his goal and got as close to Shu as possible, after which he hurried to deliver a powerful blow. Wei instantly flew to the side. Having received extremely painful injuries, she was in no hurry to give up. After setting up another magical barrier, Dong couldn't understand why she was so stubborn. Gu decided to literally seal him in an ice cylinder and hurried to implement her plan. So she surrounded Lei on all sides with ice walls and covered him with a frozen slab on top. Naturally, this did not change the course of the fight, but she had a chance to wear him out. Because the teacher spent a lot of time and effort to get free, Zhu, in turn, was recovering her strength and waiting for another skirmish with the examiner. Suddenly, Dong collapsed the ice formation, causing a mist of steam to form. An enraged Lei shouted that she would only delay the irreversible and would still lose. Gu Wei immediately used thunderbolts and sent them towards the teacher. As a result, an explosion thundered and everything sparkled with lightning. Fan was shocked by what was happening. Realizing what she was doing, she created steam to send electrical discharges throughout the area. Dong, in turn, was in an extremely poor condition and could barely stand on his feet. The student was also amazed by her own skills, receiving a lot of damage. Sug subsequently collapsed to the ground unconscious, and everyone was stunned by what had happened. At that moment, Lei also fell unconscious, and everyone froze in anticipation of someone being able to get up. Long rushed to inform everyone about Gu Wei's failure, thinking that she had failed the assessment. At the same time, Zhang argued that the girl allegedly fell to the ground first. Tian was indignant, saying that she had definitely passed the test, and he shouldn't pick on such trifles. Van immediately turned around and said with a smile on his face that she couldn't get up, which meant the test had failed. Jan continued to behave aggressively, and the protagonist urged him to calm down, saying that he needed to help Shui as soon as possible since she was in a deplorable state. Long, however, focused on the behavior of the young master's student. The young cultivator listened carefully to his dissatisfaction and immediately struck. A frightened Zhang stepped back, indignantly asking what he was doing. At that moment, a monster with a scythe appeared behind Ning. Fan said that Wen was taking on too much, and that's why he decided to teach him one very important lesson so that Long wouldn't be so arrogant in the future. But suddenly Guan stood in his way and said that he had not been so cruel in the past, adding that apparently he had completely forgotten about what happened to his parents. Ning said that he shouldn't pretend to be a decent person, since they had never been close. Yuan looked at the arena and said that his young disciple suddenly stood up. This means that it has definitely become an assessment, and there can be no objections. He then turned to a stunned Zhang and asked if he agreed that Yo had passed the test. Wen answered positively, realizing that Ruo had actually lied to him about Fan's powers. By then, Tian had come running to the exhausted and bloody Gu Wei, asking if she was okay. The guy hurried to take her to the hospital so that she could immediately receive first aid. But Zue only cared about one thing, asking Yang if she had passed the test. The young man smiled and answered positively. Then the girl breathed a sigh of relief, saying that this was the most important thing. Long, in turn, was quick to announce the next round of the test, where defense skills will be assessed, in which his humble servant, a teacher named Feng Qiang, will take part. He will be opposed by Tian Ge, who is Ning's new disciple. Fan challenged Zai to demonstrate his abilities and remember what he had taught him. An unhappy Zhang explained that if the student defeated the teacher or repelled all attacks within an hour, he would pass the test. At the same time, Wen understood that Qiang had a spell that increased his strength tenfold. Soon they entered the arena to finally test their abilities. Feng instantly rushed towards Tian, not giving him time to think. Everyone was looking forward to the spectacular fight. The main character was confident in Zige. Thus the evaluation began. Qiang continuously rained down attacks on Tian, but the student defended himself extremely skillfully, using a magical barrier. Feng began to understand that he was not so simple. Ji himself began to provoke the teacher, which, on the whole, he did quite well. Because the enraged examiner once again thoughtlessly rushed into the attack, throwing out many blows. C seemed to be enjoying what was happening and even began to mock him. Inside the impenetrable barrier, he sat down and poured himself a glass of wine, urging his teacher to work harder. In response, Feng said that when he destroyed his barrier, the guy would be in trouble. Soon his strength did indeed increase, but he realized that he was no match for his young mentor. In this regard, he remembered how a couple of days ago a young cultivator taught him some skills. C asked to teach him how to attack, but the protagonist urged him to expand his magic shield. Ji pointed out that if he did this, the barrier would become more vulnerable. Ning repeated his demand. Then Tian finally began to follow Fan's instructions and gradually expanded the shield. After some time, the barrier increased in size. Ning decided to test its strength. C, in turn, said that this was his limit, and the barrier could not be expanded further. Fan tapped on the magic sphere, causing it to crack. Soon, the shield collapsed completely. The guy said that he needed to make it stronger in order to learn how to attack. The embittered young man agreed and began to diligently train this technique. Meanwhile, Tian hurried to bring the wounded classmate to Chao in the infirmary. Li asked in surprise what had happened and why the girl was in such a state. Without explaining anything, Zhang Yang asked her to help Shuo as she might lose consciousness again. The stunned nurse urged him to carry Gu Wei to the treatment room, after which the door to the infirmary closed in front of him, and all he could do was wait for the results of the treatment. Yao immediately began to heal her and asked who dared to beat Shui. Wei replied in a choked voice that it was her own fault, as she was overly stubborn. Li stated that she was clearly not suited for undercover work and that it needed to end. The student, in turn, suddenly grabbed her hand and began to ask her not to do this. Because she doesn't want to go back to her old life, Chao thought about it. At this time, Tin ran to the medical center and began telling Ian that he should prepare for the next assessment. The guy insisted that he would have time for everything, but now he was only worried about Zhu's condition. A few minutes later, Dr. Li wheeled Gu Wei out in a wheelchair. Her face and most of her body were bandaged, and her classmates were horrified. Extremely concerned, Zhang asked about Xue's condition. Chao sighed heavily and said that she had a lot of internal injuries and might also lose her sight. The embittered youth furiously said that he would make Long and his henchmen Lei pay for this. Based on his words and behavior, Li concluded that there might be some kind of relationship between Wei and Yang. Meanwhile, half an hour passed and Ziga asked the examiner to admit his defeat, who in turn unsuccessfully beat Tian's magical barrier, but was still unable to break through it. Feng declared that the show was just beginning and tore his shirt. The student said that it was useless and that he could not bring down this shield. no matter how hard he tried. Naturally, Chang did not listen to him and, having increased his strength, continued to deal crushing blows. For some time, the teacher continued to carry out a series of ferocious attacks, but all to no avail. Tian only laughed at his efforts, once again declaring that it would have been better for him to admit defeat. However, at a certain point, the teacher was still able to achieve success, and the magical barrier began to chip. Realizing that everything could change in just a couple of blows, Feng began to strike more actively. But suddenly Gay reduced his shield, and thus Chang missed, sending his fist into the ground. Tian noted that he had taken into account all the teacher's enhancements and naturally drew conclusions. Thus, his barrier was once again completely intact, which of course infuriated the teacher, after which he again began to beat the restored magic shield. But suddenly, Z abruptly expanded the boundaries of his sphere, taking Feng by surprise. Thus, Chang simply flew out of the testing ground and crashed into the wall behind him. It seemed that the victory went to the self-confident Tian, who only laughed at the examiner. Having said that, in order to check it, it was necessary to call a teacher of at least rank C. After all, the technique that his mentor taught him really helped him in battle. Ning, in turn, was extremely pleased with the result, and he received 100 trust points. A dumbfounded Feng noted that Xiego was simply incredible and quite strong. Tian himself did not miss the opportunity to once again call himself the strongest. He stated that he would soon have a new car and would be happy to show it to him. The main character did not approve of his student's behavior and slapped him on the back of the head, urging him not to behave in such a way, adding that he still needed to perfect his defensive barrier technique. Guan watched everything that was happening. Realizing that the young master's disciples were truly strong, Feng began to say that Tian had crossed the line and had unfairly won this round, because he used a magic shield to carry out the attack, which is not allowed. An enraged Long ordered him to shut up immediately, saying he had disgraced him. Zhang then said that there was only one final round of evaluation left, which they would clearly fail. Naturally, the young cultivator had a completely different opinion, and began to declare that he should admit his defeat, because at this point all his students have passed the test, and everything he says is just nonsense. At the same time, Ning acted extremely confidently and constantly provoked Wen Long. Then Zhang said that in the next duel he would personally evaluate the abilities of his henchmen. Yuan, extremely surprised, asked him if Wen would really fight, adding that in that case he would take the judge's seat and would be happy to watch it. Of course, Fan didn't like this idea, but he had no other choice. Soon, Long entered the arena and called Tian to conduct another test. Liu Guang asked the protagonist's disciple to go to the testing ground immediately. However, the guy never showed up, so Yuan said that if he didn't show up within a minute, he would fail the exam. Zhang was still missing, which made the mentor quite nervous. A smug Long asked Fan if his student was simply scared. Ning knew that he was most likely still in the infirmary with Hui Guwei. In connection with this, he immediately asked Feng to go after him to the medical center to bring him to the arena. Chu immediately went to look for his classmate. Wen noticed that their class was one step away from being disbanded. As soon as the teenager opened the door, an angry Tian literally flew out like a bullet. Feng was frightened by Yan and backed away. Zhang confidently moved towards Long. The guy was full of hatred and naturally wanted to take revenge on him for Shuiguwei. Tian confidently said with malice in his eyes that he was ready to undergo the assessment. The main character looked at the students with great attention and said that their abilities needed to be tested. Long told the guy with displeasure not to keep the audience waiting. Zhao clenched his fist. He told the man with excitement that he needed to wait a little longer. The warrior in white clothes looked at the participants and said that everything was ready. They could begin. The man smiled very evilly and looked at his opponent. Long told the guy that he could admit defeat right then and there. He was ready to beat the student. Zhao's eyes lit up brightly. He sternly threatened the man that he would make him check and pay. The student decided not to waste time. He swung his hand sharply and hit the man in the face. Long got very angry after the guy hit him. He jumped back sharply and looked at him angrily. Zhang decided not to waste time. He swung his arm with all his might and prepared to hit Long in the face. The teacher managed to put his hand up and defended himself from the blow from Zhang's hand. The guy hit the wall with all his might and it cracked. Long dodged down in time. The man put his hand to his face. He prepared to attack the guy back. Long swung his arm very sharply and wanted to hit the guy with all his might. The student jumped up above the ring in time. The teacher angrily shouted to the frightened student that his strength was weakening. Long's eyes lit up. He called the guy a loser in a stern voice. The man hit the student with all his might and shouted that he was a worthless piece of shit. Zhao flew up sharply after the blow. The teacher shouted at the boy that he was very vulnerable. The student, after being hit by his opponents, flew high and hovered above the ring. Long stood on the floor and watched the guy. The man looked angrily at the guy and shouted that he could only dream of taking revenge on him. Zhao flew down on the teacher and swung his arm to hit him with all his might. Long swung his leg wide. He knocked the student away and he flew high into the air. The warrior looked at Zhao with concern and thought to himself that the guy had no more strength. It was a complete failure. Zhang fell to the floor after the flight. He raised his head and looked ahead. The fan was scared. He realized that the student had no more strength. It was a complete failure. A girl in a robe drove up to the door. She was pushing Shu in a wheelchair and told her that they needed to hurry because everything had started. The girl noticed with surprise how the door to the competition room had been broken down and turned to the side. The guest noticed with excitement how one fighter, after a powerful blow, flew up and hit the ceiling. Shu looked ahead in fear. Her companion shouted in fear that Zhang was starting to lose. The beaten fighter rose from his fall and looked angrily ahead. Long looked at the guy very angrily and said that his resistance was useless. Zhao swung his arm sharply and prepared to hit the man with all his might. The student crushed his opponent with a very powerful blow to the face. Long then flew far into the corner of the ring. The beaten man lay unconscious in the corner of the ring, motionless. Zhao looked at the beaten teacher with anger and fear. He decided to finish him off. Yu sat bandaged in the wheelchair. She thought about Zhang Tian with fear. Zhao approached the beaten teacher and in an angry voice threatened that he would settle scores with him. The main character stood on the balcony with the warrior. They were closely watching the battle in the ring. The fan said in a dissatisfied voice that if the student continued to be angry, he would not be able to pass the assessment. The girl swung her hand and slammed it on the door. She sternly called the main character. The partner said sternly and angrily that if Zhang continued in the same spirit, he would no longer be a rival for long. The girl sternly demanded that the main character do something with his student. The fan was unhappy because the girl did not give him time to think. The warrior looked at the student and said that he was getting out of control. Zhang forgot everything he learned in grade S. The main character was very scared and worried when he heard such words from the fighter. The fan turned around and looked at the stern girl behind him. He realized that everything could be exactly like this. The main character called out to Zhang's student from the balcony with a joyful voice. The student continued to fight, stood and covered himself with his hands. The teacher turned to him and demanded that he listen to him. The main character commanded the surprised guy in a stern voice to remain calm. He had to control his spirit and ki. Long flew forward at the guy and stretched his legs out in front of him. He shouted that the student was finished. The main character shouted to the beaten student that he was still very strong. A beaten warrior with torn clothes wanted to say something. Next to him was a fighter in a white shirt. The fighter said in a weakening voice that if his opponent was at a disadvantage, he would simply come back and hit him. The warrior said in a thoughtful voice that he had never thought that magi could be diverse in combat. But the boxer only had himself. The warrior raised his hand up to the glowing ceiling. He said in a thoughtful voice that the darker the situation, the calmer the fighter should be. The guy extended his hand forward and there was a stronger glow near it. He said in a thoughtful voice that a warrior must hide his spirit and chi. Also, he must use every ounce of his strength to break out of his lowest point. The guy looked carefully ahead and said that if the warrior did everything exactly like this, he would fully reveal his power. A fighter in a white suit stood behind the students and reminded them that they must agree with each other and hide their spirit and ki. Zhang repeated to himself with concentration that they needed to agree with each other and hide their spirit and ki. The student listened very attentively in front of him. He continued to hear the teacher's words. Long, with his legs stretched out in front, flew towards the student and shouted that it was the end for him. The guy very sharply and quickly dodged the man's blow to the side. The opponent was unable to hit him. Zhang said to himself in a dissatisfied voice that he had forgotten about a very important thing. The man jumped on top of the rope and shouted in an angry voice at his opponent that he was not finished yet. Long turned around during the attack and asked the guy in an angry voice, "Why is he dreaming in the midst of battle?" Long looked at the guy very angrily and menacingly and shouted that it was the end for him. Zhang stood and held his hand behind his back. He was able to repel his opponent with a powerful blow. The warrior in white clothes looked at the student carefully. He thought that Zhang's ki had cooled down or calmed down. The main character stretched out his hand forward and called out to Zhang in a very frightened voice. The warrior said in a thoughtful voice that such evaluation and the use of excessive outside assistance could lead to disqualification. The protagonist thought sadly to himself that he would leave the rest to Zhang. The man looked angrily at the student. He realized with displeasure that the guy had become much stronger. Long shouted at his opponent in an angry and confident voice that he would definitely lose. The man suddenly kicked away and jumped up to hit his opponent with all his might. Zhang swung his arm and prepared to fight off his opponent. Long swung his hand with all his might and hit the student's hand. Long flew back after an unsuccessful attack and blow. Zhang flew back and hit his back in the corner of the ring. The student stood and looked ahead through the clouds of dust. He saw the silhouette of his opponent. Long told the guy in surprise that with a little power he was actually an S-class genius. Sue watched the students battle with great excitement. She even tried to stand up on her feet. The girl pulled back the bandage on her face. She shouted words of support to Zhang in a frightened voice. The beaten guy was lying in the hospital. It was very difficult for him to come to his senses. The student repeated to himself in an exhausted voice that all this was supposed to be a small procedure. The patient was strapped to the bed and had a lot of wires coming into him. He said in a disgruntled voice that it didn't look like a small procedure. A man with long hair and glasses handed the chainsaw to the patient and shouted that he shouldn't worry and that he would cure him. The man extended the chainsaw forward towards the patient and said in an angry voice that it was almost done. Long glared at the guy and asked sternly, could it really be that he was an S-class genius with such little power? The man swung his arm wide and prepared to finish off his prone opponent. Ye shouted words of encouragement to the student in a frightened voice. Zhang looked ahead in fear and managed to duck in time from his opponent's blow. Long continued to hit the student with very powerful blows of his hand. Zhang jumped back. The man looked angrily at the guy and sternly shouted that he wanted to see how long he could dodge. Zhang protected his body with his hands so that Long's hand would not hit him too hard. The man hit the guy with all his might with his hand and he flew far back. Zhang was able to stay on his feet after his opponent's attack. He stopped near the edge of the ring. The student told himself in a stern voice that he had to calm down. He couldn't let his anger get the better of him. The guy swung his arm with all his might and hit Long's hand with his hand. There was a very bright explosion. Zhang swung his arm with all his might and hit the surprised Long's head with his hand. The student was surprised to see how after his blow, his opponent flew far away from him. Zhang said to himself in an excited voice that his chance had come. He couldn't ruin everything here. Long stood in a cloud of smoke. He told the guy in an angry voice that he had underestimated him. A bright glow appeared around the man. He shouted at the guy that he made him use his trump card. The student could now be proud of himself even if he had not passed the assessment. Long suddenly took off and ran forward at full speed towards the guy with his hand outstretched. The man swung and tried to hit the guy in the head with all his might. The student managed to run back in time. Zhang threatened his rival in an angry voice that he would make him pay for Zhue Wei. Zhang managed to jump to the side very quickly and run back to Long. The student shouted at the man in an angry voice that he would make him pay for the Shui Wei. Long swung his hand and hit the guy in the stomach with all his might. Zhang was able to stay on his feet after being hit by his opponent, and a bright red glow appeared around him. The man looked around in fear. He did not notice that the student was standing next to him and looking at him angrily. Long continued to wave his arms angrily in all directions. Zhang stood silently behind him. The student swung his leg with all his might and unexpectedly hit Long in the back from behind. The man was surprised when he realized that his opponent was behind him. Zhang kicked the fighter in the back with all his might. Long, after a very powerful blow from a student, flew high up and hit the ceiling. The man, after flying upwards, came back down and landed in the ring with his arms outstretched. The man looked carefully to the side and noticed some silhouette in the clouds of smoke. Zhang stretched his leg forward in midair and hit his surprised opponent in the face with all his might. Long was unable to defend himself from his opponent's attack and flew far back after the powerful blow. A beaten student in hospital clothes walked down the corridor on crutches. He was all bandaged up. The patient with crutches said with displeasure that the doctor was definitely deceiving him. Suddenly, the guy heard some suspicious noise from the side. He looked there in fear. Something hit the wall of the building very hard. It cracked and started to fly apart. The frightened patient saw an unfamiliar man break through the wall and fly next to him. Long caught the guy in flight. He flew out of the building. The patient fell to the ground. There were cracks around him. A battered Long lay on top. The warrior said in a stern and unambiguous voice that student Zhang had completely passed the assessment. The guy from the balcony looked carefully at the ring. There were beaten fighters lying there. He said that the former genius of the S-class had regained his throne. The warrior said in a thoughtful voice that this time he would personally apply for promotion for Class D. Shai stood up and helped his friend up. Zhang asked again about the promotion in a surprised voice. Li shouted to his friends in an excited voice that they no longer had to worry about being expelled. Yan said in a sly voice that they had defeated the teacher of Class B. They could have been transferred to Class A. The main character told the girl that she should be fine. Everyone did well today. The fan excitedly told the students that the day was not over yet. He promised to treat everyone to a barbecue after school. The students raised their hands in unison and shouted that of course they would go. The students were sitting at a table in a restaurant and drinking together. They clinked their glasses. The students happily consumed food and drinks at a large table. Fan told his friends to slow down a bit. The fan told his friends in a happy voice that they had all worked hard and that they could now enjoy themselves. At that moment, a woman came up from the side and slammed her hand on the table. Chao sat down next to the main character and called him with displeasure. The guy could not understand why the woman had to come here. A guy and a girl in hospital clothes were sitting at a table in fear. The woman sternly pointed at the students and asked the main character why he allowed the wounded students to eat meat. Jan held food in her hands. She looked at the woman and suggested that she eat with them. A huge stone golem came up behind the woman and sat her down at the table. Chao angrily told the students that she was not so easy to persuade. Shu smiled and told the teacher that she felt safe with her. The woman told the students in a disgruntled voice that she would eat with them only this time. Chu looked at the plate in front of him with great excitement and surprise. He saw that his food had disappeared. The amazed students looked at the tray on the table with great surprise. They did not understand where the meat had gone. He held the chopsticks in his hands. He was unhappy that someone took his meat. Shir put his hand on his friend's shoulder and said that his meat had disappeared from his plate. Li held the chopsticks in his mouth and said in a weak voice that this was all very strange. The students argued angrily among themselves about the missing meat. Fan said in a cheerful voice that Tiange had blended in well with the class. The student asked the guy excitedly when he planned to choose a plant for growing hair. The fan answered his partner that they would decide everything together tomorrow. The students were sitting at the table and trying to grab a piece of food with chopsticks. Fan told the girl that the students passed the exam thanks to her help. The partner smiled at the guy and explained that this is exactly what she does. The woman was sitting to the side and talking to someone on the phone. She said that everything was exactly like that. Chao told her partner that the girl Shui was seriously injured, and they must take revenge. On the second day, the main character and the students approached the doors of Class D. It was sealed. Li looked at the entrance to the classroom in surprise and said that the door was sealed and closed. There was a sign on the door. The classroom was sealed, and the use of educational equipment was suspended. One of the students said that the finance department was to blame for everything. Fan swung his arm and kicked the door with all his might to open it. The protagonist looked around the office. He said in a dissatisfied voice that such a cunning method cannot be used to deal with them. The teacher looked and noticed with surprise that there were no desks inside the classroom. Li said in a dissatisfied voice that all the furniture had been taken out. He felt that he had already gotten used to it. She turned around and began to tell something to his friend with interest in his ear. He asked him for something. She asked his friend in a sly voice to finally do it. Li shouted joyfully and called the student a genius. The main character turned around and sternly asked the students, "What are they talking about?" The students spitefully promised the teacher that they would take care of the finance department. They would make sure that their furniture was returned to them. The student ran at full speed down the corridor. He approached the school employee's door. She opened the door wide. A man was sitting inside. He looked at the guest with fear. The student asked the man very angrily, "Could it really have been all him?" The frightened man raised his hands in front of him and asked the guy what class he was from. The worker asked the student in a frightened voice what he wanted. After a short pause, the man opened his eyes. He realized that the guy did not want to attack him. The student suddenly grimaced and tears appeared on his face. He screamed in fear. The guy fell to the floor and started screaming in fear that he was in a lot of pain. The worker told the student in a frightened voice that if he was in pain, he should go to the infirmary, not to the finance department. Shai shouted in a loud and frightened voice that the teacher had hit someone and it was very painful. The frightened man shouted at the guy that he couldn't do anything. At this time, she looked into the office and took a photo of the worker with his camera. The man asked the guy with displeasure what he was doing. The guy at the door said in a stern voice that he was passing by and noticed the teacher bullying the student. She angrily demanded the man to return the equipment to Class D. Li sternly threatened the employee that his photo might get out. The man was very scared. He answered the students with a trembling voice that he did not agree. She demanded that the worker hand over the confiscated equipment and furniture. Lee sternly threatened the man that their patience might snap. The employee explained to the guests in a disgruntled voice that there was a surveillance camera in his office. The students were scared. They realized that their plan would no longer be successful. The worker carefully opened the door and brought a tray with tea and napkins into the office. The guy asked the warrior with displeasure why he had gathered them all here. The man sat at the table and looked attentively at the book. He said nothing. The girl blew out steam from her cup and said that everything should be interesting. The worker placed the cup in front of the customer on the table. The warrior told his teammates that Class D won during the evaluation, and they also beat the teacher of Class B, so Class D deserves a promotion. The guy looked at his partners with interest and asked what they thought about it. A teacher named Manhwa held a glass in his hand. He said in a dissatisfied voice that the teacher was too soft with the students. The teacher named Wen Ruin said in a thoughtful voice that she was satisfied with a simple promotion of Class D. The man continued to sit with the book and read it attentively. He did not say anything. The girl with green eyes said in a happy voice that this group of children is very talented. They can get a promotion. Young turned around and looked to the side in surprise, and said that Teacher Dio did too. The warrior in white clothes told his partners in a calm voice that the issue had been resolved. The guy headed towards the exit. The girl followed him out with Juan. Young asked Selu with displeasure, why did he not have any opinion? He also hated Fanya. The village sat and read the book attentively. He said that the students could be promoted to Class S. They definitely had abilities. The worker stood near the front door and listened attentively. Yang turned around with displeasure and asked the man why he did the same. The teacher named Selo said in a thoughtful voice that the protagonist had not yet come to his senses. He was not qualified enough to teach the students of Class S. Yang told his partner in a joyful voice that they would lure the main character over to their side. Then Fan could run away. The guy inside the room laughed happily and shouted to the man that this was just like him. The worker walked out into the corridor and adjusted his cap. He said in an excited voice that Zhang Tianyang wanted to return to Class S. He had to come up with a plan. Lu looked at the guest in surprise and asked, does he still want to bother him? After this, the man suddenly fell to his knees, as if an invisible force had struck him. Liu was kneeling and looking down at the floor in front of him. He didn't understand what had happened. At this time, the main character entered the office. He said that Teacher Lu was in front of him now. Fan said in a dissatisfied voice to the man that he would not be able to bear his gift. The guy activated a skill called Bao to the master on the teacher. The angry Lu asked the guy with displeasure what he had done to him. The man fell to his knees again. Fan continued to use his skill on him. The protagonist leaned over and told the man that he had already realized his mistake. He wanted to forgive him for his apology. Liu told his partner that he shouldn't be so arrogant. The protagonist began to study the man with the help of the magic eye. He wanted to talk to him about the issues regarding Class D. The man was kneeling and told the boy that it was impossible. Liu had been wounded in a battle in the past. He couldn't use the Call of Life, but he could summon a white tiger. The fans certainly looked at the teacher and offered to make a deal with him. Liu answered the guy with displeasure that he had nothing he wanted to tell him. The fan told the man that a couple of years ago he was trapped. As a result, his summoned beast fell into a deep sleep. The boy told the teacher that he could help him summon his beast. The teacher told the boy in a displeased voice that no one would believe his nonsense. The main character told the students that they would now return. Shuri answered the guy that he agreed. A surprised Liu looked at them from behind. The main character told the teacher in a sly voice that he originally wanted to invite him to cure his baldness. The man remembered with displeasure how everyone around him insulted him and called him bald. Liu suddenly rushed forward and grabbed the protagonist by the leg to stop him. The man grabbed the guy by the leg and asked fearfully, "Can he prove it?" The main character looked at the man happily and said that he could easily do it. A bright glow appeared near the guy's head. He extended his hand forward and told the man that he would first call his beast. The girl stood near the classroom of Class D. She said in a dissatisfied voice that she was very bored. Yan at the door told the students that they were not bored at all. The students happily watched as the magic bird ate food from her hand. Several guys came up from the side. They said that the worst class in the school doesn't even attend classes. Jan looked at them in surprise. Fighter Wang angrily asked the guy, did he really break his arm? Next to him stood a S-class summoner named Chi Lei. Van angrily asked the student why he was still using plaster. The guy on the side asked his partners with displeasure, why are they still here? Zhang said that he himself wants to deal with it. He angrily extended his hand forward and shouted at the students to hurry up and get lost. The main character looked sternly at the man and said that he must definitely follow his instructions. The student stood to the side and looked at the teacher with great surprise. A courier in yellow clothes approached from the side. He brought a delivery for Mr. Ning. Fan glanced happily to the side. The courier placed a large yellow box on the floor in front of the teacher. The fan looked at the man happily and with a smile and told him that they would begin preparations. Liu asked the guy in a dissatisfied voice, "Can't they really change anything?" Fan looked at the man very angrily and asked if he wanted to see his summoned beast. He demanded that Liu do what he told him. Liu looked carefully at the table with boxes of food. He prepared to devour it. The main character stood near the door. He told the man to try to summon his beast while he was eating. Liu asked the guy in surprise, "Will he really have to eat all of this?" The student stood happily at the door. Li shouted in a cheerful voice that he was the only one whose mouth was watering just looking at the food. Liu hit his hand with the knife. A bright red glow appeared near it. The man shouted in a joyful voice that he didn't care and he wanted to do it. Liu grabbed a piece of food with his chopsticks and prepared to eat it. The man, without wasting any time, devoured food from plates using chopsticks. The teacher brought a small piece of fish with chopsticks to his mouth. It seemed tasty to him. Suddenly, very bright blood spurted out of the teacher's wound in his hand. The man looked at the yellow light from his hand in surprise. He said that maybe it was so. The teacher was surprised to see a small yellow cat appear in front of him. The teacher hugged the cat. He said that they would fight together now. The animal was unhappy. It started to hit the man with its paws. The cat shouted to the man that he smelled very bad. The protagonist looked happily at the cat in the man's hands. He said that cats are very sensitive to smells. Scents can awaken a person's contracted beast. The summoned pet is very weak and one must be careful. The teacher held the cat in his arms in front of him. Liu gave the main character 500 trust points. The main character looked attentively at the system window. His trust points increased and the awakening percentage increased. For the owner, the possibility of activating a new feature appeared. The fan thought to himself with displeasure that he needed 1,000 trust points to unlock the new opportunity. Liu fell to his knees in front of the guy and said that he would follow him everywhere. Fan thought to himself that he would not rush to activate the new skill yet. He wanted to wait until his trust points increased. The protagonist told the student to take the equipment back to Class D. Li happily told the teacher that he would do everything. The student turned around and wanted to call his friend with him. He noticed with surprise that she had disappeared somewhere. The main character received a phone call. He reached out and took the device. She told the protagonist that she was approaching the school gate and was waiting for him to come out. Nearby, Li scolded his friend Shifeng in a dissatisfied voice. She reminded the guy that they were supposed to go pick medicinal herbs today. Fan answered his partner in a frightened voice that he hadn't forgotten. Fan decided not to waste time. He went to the window and opened it. He prepared to jump down. The boy jumped out of the window and landed on the ground. He thought angrily that the stupid and bald teacher had wasted all his time. Sigh. He put his hand on the student's shoulder. He asked the guests in a displeased voice, where did they come from, and demanded that they get lost. Wang looked at the students very angrily and said that Zhang now had a patron. Qi looked ahead with displeasure and said that he was only here for Zhang. The rest should get lost. He looked angrily at the student and shouted that he wanted to see what he would do. The student stretched out his hand in front of him. He saw a large, thick smoke appear in front of him. Qi stood and held his hand in front of him. He wanted to say something to his opponent. He stood under the protective dome. He said it was just a blow from a village beast. He looked angrily ahead and said in a slow voice that this was a turtle defense. The fighter decided to rush forward and try to break through the student's protective dome. He came close to the protective blue dome and tried to break through it with his hand. C extended his hand forward in front of him and activated the expansion of the protective dome. The student suddenly felt himself being carried away from the barrier. C stood under the protective covering. Qi suddenly jumped to the side of the dome and turned over in flight. Qi flew high up to the ceiling and prepared to attack the student from below under the dome. The student looked angrily at his opponent and told him not to get ahead of himself. He looked ahead with displeasure and only managed to shout something. The protective dome shattered and Qi began to fall from a great height from the building onto the street. The frightened Sei fell down from a great height and Qi flew above him. Two fighters fell from a great height to the ground, sending large clouds of dust up onto the road. Van stretched out his hand in front of him and looked at the street in surprise. He said in a happy voice that the guy had really become serious. Now this place needs some repairs. Yan ran up to the guy from the side. They looked at the fallen student with fear and called him by name. Qi stretched out his hand forward and lifted his beaten opponent off the ground. Chu was quietly descending from above in a protective dome. He was preparing to attack Qi. Chu looked down in fear and called the student C. He wanted to help him. The student landed in front of Qi after his flight and prepared to attack him. The fighter still held her by the collar and prepared to throw her to the student. Chu looked ahead with great fear. He realized that he needed to find a way to break the protective barrier. Qi swung his arm and threw the student away from him. Z knocked Chu off his feet in midair. The beaten Chu lay on the ground. On top of him lay So, completely unconscious. Zhang looked down at the ground from the building in fear and shouted that this was enough. Qi glared at the student and said that he came to find him first. He demanded that Zhang come to him and they finish the last competition. The student in the hospital suit looked down and said in a mournful voice to the fighter that he agreed. The girl at the side wanted to stop him and extended her hand. Yang worriedly told her friend that he was still injured and should not cause trouble. The girl was unhappy that Qi dared to offend her friends. The girl thought to herself in fear and wanted to remember where exactly Ningfan played. The main character, together with his girlfriend, ran forward in fear and breathed very heavily. Fan ran at full speed and carried his girlfriend in his arms. Huge and predatory bees flew after the people. She was lying in the protagonist's arms. He stretched his hand forward towards the bees and demanded that they be frozen. Large ice crystals flew away from the girl and began to freeze the insects. The fan turned around and asked his girlfriend with displeasure if she had meant these bees when she had spoken about the danger. The partner answered the guy that there should be no poisonous insects in this place. Their actions were abnormal. The guy asked the girl in surprise, "Can someone really control bees from the outside?" Fan continued running forward. He noticed how the insects around him continued to fly. The main character looked around carefully and saw predatory insects flying around. Fan stood surrounded by insects. He demanded that the invisible stranger come out. An unfamiliar silhouette surrounded by bees shouted to the guy and girl that everything would be as they were living. The man in the white suit held a small pot of incense in front of his pants. He looked sternly at his partner and said that he had first looked for the long-haired monster. In the end, he had received an additional bonus. The stranger asked his partners, were they really sent by users of orthodox abilities? The main character and his girlfriend decided to attack a stranger using magic. Fan and the girl used freezing magic and an explosive shield against the man. The main character raised his finger, and a fire appeared near it. He told the stranger that he had gotten involved with the wrong people. The main character activated a skill called Flaming Sky. There was a bright fire around him. The stranger looked at the guy in fear. The surprised man with a pot in his hand said that the guy uses many different abilities at the same time. The man suddenly saw with horror how the pot in his hand shattered into pieces. The fan told his opponent in an angry voice that all the most unexpected things were behind him. The man was very much shocked. He clearly felt that he was in great danger. An unknown man was lying unconscious on the ground. The main character looked at him and told the girl that they could have beaten him up badly. Fan and his girlfriend listened carefully. They felt a suspicious noise nearby. The main character asked the girl with great excitement, "What are those sounds next to them?" The partner told the guy with fear that they heard a long-haired monster. He could have come here with a man. The guest's purpose could have been spiritual medicine. The fan looked ahead with displeasure and told his girlfriend that he had gotten out of there quickly. The fat man turned out to be a real fool. Shai walked calmly along the school corridor all alone. There was silence all around. The student said in a cheerful voice that he just needed to go back to class and wait for the chairs and tables to return. The boy looked ahead and couldn't understand what had happened. She looked ahead in surprise and saw huge clouds of smoke and stones. The student with glasses looked closely and noticed with surprise that in front of him was a student from Class S. Van stood and looked ahead with great attention. She could not understand why this guy appeared here. She looked ahead attentively and fearfully. He did not understand why the unfamiliar guy was here. Yan looked angrily at the student and said that he had harmed her friends. She was not finished with him yet. The girl pulled out the magic hair and commanded her stone golem to come out. A stone monster with glowing eyes appeared from the side and looked forward angrily. A huge steel robot suddenly appeared from the side and began to attack the golem. The demonic knight in steel armor climbed up the side of the building and managed to break off the head of the stone monster. Yang stood and looked at this with great surprise. Van looked ahead in surprise and told the girl not to talk to him as if he didn't exist. The steel warrior continued to stand and hold the head of the stone golem in his hands. Yan pointed her hand to the side and told her chick to fly there and attack. The chick rushed forward at full speed and flew past the steel knight. Van looked at the chick and said in a thoughtful voice that this summoned beast was very interesting. Jan commanded the chick in a very stern voice to attack the student. Van stretched out his hand forward and made a cut in it with the help of a huge blade. Van called the demonic beast girl to his aid. The guy told his rival in an angry voice that her beast was simply worthless. The predator with teeth angrily attacked the chick and growled very menacingly. The frightened bird got scared and flew away to its owner. The girl got scared too. She glanced sideways with excitement at his beaten friends Chu Feng and Xia. The predator rushed towards the frightened girl. Shi himself called Yang the big-headed sister. The student looked closely at the frightened Zhang Tian next to him. Shi thought to himself with excitement that his friends must have known what would happen if they insulted Class S. The boy decided that he would be finished if he took even one step. The frightened guy closed his eyes. He kept repeating to himself that he needed to leave. Van, without turning around, told the student that he was even uncomfortable looking at him. The fighter said angrily that Shi might not even dare to attack him. An angry Shai pointed his hand forward. There was a pink glow near it. Yang turned around very frightened. She called Shi. The predator was still standing in front of her. The student looked angrily ahead. He shouted at the girl to go and help herself and others. The lying Shi told his friend that the fighter would not be able to attack him if he simply flew away. Chu asked his partner in fear. What would happen to him if he left now? He swung his hand and prepared to hit his opponent. He asked angrily, "Will he be able to escape from this?" The student swung his arm wide and tried to finish off Chu with all his might. Suddenly, a group of large golems appeared in front of the guy. The monster told him that from that moment, the situation had changed. He told the mutant in an angry voice that none of them would be able to hit him. The guy turned around and started running away at full speed. He shouted to the golem that he could come to him himself if he had such an opportunity. The main character and his companion stood near a huge cave. She told the guy that they needed to hurry to get the rare herb. Fan worriedly warned his partner that someone was approaching them. The guests looked around in fear and noticed someone's red eyes glowing in the cave. The demonic animal spread its paws to the side and screamed at the man. A mysterious animal fell to the ground near the guy. The fan was surprised when he realized that there was a hairy monster next to him. Suddenly, some stranger from the cave launched a bright lightning bolt to destroy the horde of monsters. Lightning struck the hairy little animal. It screamed in fear and displeasure. The boy stretched out his hand forward and grabbed the bright lightning with it to protect the little animal. The stranger in the cave asked the guests with displeasure who dared to stop his whip. The girl grabbed the little animal in her arms. The main character told the stranger that killing wild animals is illegal. The man said to the guests in a dissatisfied voice that Aji was supposed to guard the forest. He did not understand how they got here. Fan told his partner in a sly voice that he had hit the man in the forest a little harder than usual. The man swung his whip and wanted to hit the guy. He shouted that he would kill him. Fan looked at Aide with displeasure and thought that he was very grumpy. He used the eye of the master on him. The man fell to his knees and raised his hands up. He shouted something menacingly and called for help. The fan came up to Hell from behind and in a very stern voice demanded that he get up. Ada stretched out his hand in front of him and activated the bright network. He shouted at the guy that he would kill him. Fan stretched out his hand in front of him and blocked the bright lightning strike. A demonic monster in a death suit suddenly appeared on the side of the frightened man. The demon swung his huge axe wide and chopped off Hell's weapon. A man with a bright blade near his head told the guy in a very frightened voice that they could come to an agreement. Ada fell to the ground and shouted that it hurt a lot. The main character and his girlfriend were standing next to him. The hairy monster ran happily towards the cave. There, someone's red eyes were glowing everywhere. A whole group of hairy monsters were heading forward to meet their little beast. Fans stood surrounded by demonic hairy monsters. They quietly talked to each other. The main character looked around in surprise and could not understand what was happening. Scared as Hell stood surrounded by little hairy monsters. The girl waved her hand to the animals and thanked them. She said goodbye to them. The companion told the guy with a smile that the beast seemed grateful to her. They weren't as fierce as in the books. Fan stood and held a huge load on his back. He told the girl that everything in the book could have been written incorrectly. The main character asked his girlfriend with a smile, how much grass for hair growth together with them? There were huge sheaves behind him. The girl told her friend with a smile that it was already late and they needed to go home. The man angrily asked the guy from behind, "Is he really sure that he can leave?" Ada stretched out his hand forward and a bright lightning bolt appeared near his finger. The man sternly demanded that the frightened boy put the herbs down. He promised to give him an easy death. The main character in a sly voice told the man to first look at what was behind his back. Ada got angry and a bright lightning appeared near his hand. He threatened the guy that he would kill him. Suddenly, someone's huge hand reached out from behind and grabbed the man. The man turned around in fright and saw himself being grabbed from behind by a huge hairy monster. Ada was very scared. The monster looked at him angrily with burning eyes. Fan happily looked ahead and said that everything that was written in the book turned out to be true. She happily agreed with him. The next day, Lee came to Class D very happily and greeted the students. The beaten students looked at their friend in silence and with displeased glances. He was holding a piece of food in his hands. He asked his friends in fear, "Did they really fight?" Shai told his friend that yesterday the students from Class S came to them and caused trouble. The beaten Zhang told his friends in a frightened voice that it was all his fault. The guy said in a sad voice that he had to become stronger himself in order to restore justice for everyone. He slammed his fist on the table with all his might. He shouted that he couldn't stand it either. Jan looked at her friends and asked in a displeased voice, "Don't they have enough troubles?" Suddenly, two fighters entered the room. Van greeted the surprised students. The beaten Van told the students in an angry voice that he never thought they would dare to go to school. Jan asked the student in a dissatisfied voice what she wanted to do again. Van told the students in an angry voice that they wanted to come to an agreement with them today. A fighter named Sunzi sternly told the students that he wanted to find a spirit boy in their class. She was very surprised. He looked at the guest in fear and did not answer him. Sun asked Shai angrily, "Is it really he who is the spirit boy?" There were a lot of people near the entrance to the institute. The main character told the warrior that his face was very terrible early in the morning. The fighter in white clothes told his partner that there would be a meeting this morning about the test and the promotion of Class D. Everyone should go with him. Fan asked his partner if he had told his superiors about this. People in the crowd were surprised when they heard that a student from Class D had defeated a teacher from Class B. The student happily told the girl that the whole school knew about it. The protagonist listened attentively to the students' conversations among themselves. One of them said that Class D was very badly damaged after a fight with Class S. The fan got very angry when he heard such words from the girls. The warrior put his hand on the protagonist's shoulder from behind. He said that they would talk about it after the meeting. The director would be there. The fan became very worried when he heard from his partner that the director would be at the meeting. Xian sat and carefully studied the document in his hands. He said that there was a problem in the Class D test that caused Yue Wei to be injured. The man said that Chief Examiner Long should be removed. The man on the side asked the frightened Long if he wanted to say anything. Long said in a dissatisfied voice that Dong Lei had lost to Xue Wei before, and this time he was deliberately taking revenge for his grievance. The man at the table shouted angrily at his partner that he was talking nonsense. Long showed a photograph in his hands. He said that it was proof of Dong Lei's shots. The warrior sternly told the teacher that he would not be able to escape responsibility. He reminded him that Long had gone over to Dong Lei's side at that time. The man said without turning around that Dong Lei was expelled from school due to his serious mistake. He was also responsible for the student's injury. Teacher Long would now be in charge of logistics management instead of being the class teacher. Long wanted to say something in his defense. The director angrily shouted at him to shut up. Director Diao Guoyu told the man in a stern voice that he could submit his resignation if he had any objections. The warrior looked calmly to the side and said that most of the students had already reached level S strength. He believed that this class should be raised. After a very powerful blow from a student, Xu flew to the side and the desk broke under him. The fighter's son looked very angrily at the student and called him a weak chicken. Wang sternly demanded that Zhang kneel before him and bow. He promised to spare him. Jan angrily told the fighter that her friend wouldn't do such a thing. She wasn't going to give him any of her friends. Suddenly, the door to the classroom opened sharply. Sun turned around and looked away with excitement. Yan looked ahead with great fear and noticed that the main character had entered the classroom. The fan entered the room and said in a disgruntled voice that he had been gone for one day, but something had already happened. The fan turned around and said in an angry voice that he wanted to see who dared to mock his students. Diao looked angrily ahead and said that Ning Fan might come into the office. The meeting participants sat silently at the table and waited for someone to come to them. A silhouette of someone suddenly appeared in the door. Everyone was waiting for the fan to arrive. A man entered the office fully dressed in clothes similar to the main character. Director Diao asked the guest with displeasure. Does he really dare to miss the meeting? The main character entered the office and said in a stern voice that he wanted to see who was bullying his students. Van looked at the students in surprise and asked why they weren't fighting him. Van looked at the student and said that he was a pile of trash. He was just waiting for the teacher to be able to avenge him. Jan looked at the guest with great displeasure and angrily asked who he called trash. Fan put his hand on the girl's shoulder. He told Van that his students could easily remove him from the class rankings. The fighter angrily told the main character that his brain could have been damaged after being wounded. The fan calmly told his partner that he could choose any of his fighters to try out. Van told the protagonist in an angry voice that he agreed to his proposal. The fighter pointed his finger sternly at student C and said that he was choosing him. C looked at the fighter with interest and said that he did not have long to live. He chose the strongest opponent in this class. The main character abruptly hit the student on the back and shouted that he had been chosen. The fan looked sternly at the guy and said that he wanted to tell him something. The fan stood behind the student and told him that he should listen to him carefully now. The main character hugged his student and began to give him various recommendations. Van stood behind and watched this attentively. Fan demanded in a stern voice from the students that he try and not be soft. He looked angrily at the fighter and asked if he was ready to be beaten. Suddenly, he sat down on the ground and covered his head with his hands from above. The main character and Vanya stood and looked at the frightened fighter with great surprise. The main character thought in fear. He realized that in the future, he couldn't beat himself. The protagonist stood on the platform and told the fighters that they should begin. Van stood opposite C. He stood inside the protective dome. He angrily told his opponent that he would be gentle with him. Vanya had a pink fire on his hand. He angrily told his opponent that he only thought he was amazing. Suddenly, a huge predatory wolf with 3 heads and burning eyes appeared in front of the guy. Van angrily told his opponent that he should be ready to pay for justice. He stood under the protective dome, calmly watching as the demonic predator pounced on him. Suddenly, the blue protective dome exploded and large spikes flew off from the side of it. The fan looked happily ahead and said that this child was learning very quickly. The demonic wolf was pierced by sharp spikes after attacking the protective dome. He stood calmly under the protection of a blue arch and looked ahead. On sharp spikes was the body of a demonic wolf. The student glared at his opponent and said that he found his advanced version of the challenge funny. The guy suddenly fell to the ground and covered his head with his hands. C looked angrily at his opponent and said that his version of the challenge was very funny. At this time, the student's trust points for the teacher increased. Van extended his hand forward and a pink glow appeared next to it. He said angrily to his opponent that the words from his teacher were useful. The fighter extended his hand forward and summoned his demonic beast. He shouted at his opponent that he would deal with him anyway. He suddenly reached out his hand to the protective dome and shouted to his opponent that he could try. A bright blue beam of light suddenly shot forward and pierced the demonic beast. The demoness screamed sharply and jumped up. A blue thorn struck her paw from below. He stretched out his hand in front of him and commanded forward. There were huge spikes above the protective dome. The little animal looked angrily ahead. Suddenly, a very powerful explosion was heard on the ground and stones flew around. The student stood below the protective dome. He noticed a demonic silhouette with glowing eyes appear from above. The flying demoness viciously released her huge claws and tried to break through the protective cap over the guy. Van stretched out his hand in fear to protect his body. He thought fearfully to himself that his rival had used a more powerful weapon against him. The student remembered that the main character told him about the method of switching to a different attack. C listened attentively to the teacher. Fan told him that the stronger the imagination, the stronger the ability will be. The demoness looked angrily at the guy and prepared to fight him off. Suddenly, a huge blue monster appeared and decided to bite the demonic animal with his teeth. The huge blue jaws closed and swallowed the demoness inside. Van looked ahead in fear and realized that his demonic beast had been destroyed. Van ran to the side in fear and shouted to the student that he had beaten him. The boy asked excitedly, "Will Class D be able to participate in the ranking competition?" He looked ahead very angrily and discontentedly and chuckled loudly. The student looked slyly at his opponent and shouted that he was already defeated. The main character hit the student on the back with all his might. He shouted that he deserved to be hit. Van hugged the student and asked, "Who said that their guys couldn't beat Class S?" The teacher asked the student why he was bullied like that. She looked calmly ahead and said to the teacher in a thoughtful voice that Class S was very strong. The main character got angry. He told the students that he was very gentle with them. The teacher promised the students that the next training sessions would be more serious. The guy took out a small bottle with purple liquid. He told Xing Yue to come to him. The girl took the bottle in her hands and asked the guy what it was. The fan explained to the student that he was giving her a reward for his previous victory. Yan grabbed the bottle and drained it to the bottom. Fan shouted at the girl to drink some. Suddenly, the student's hair grew long. The fan shouted to the frightened girl that she had drunk too much. The disgruntled student asked the teacher why he hadn't told her about this before. The fan answered his partner that when he told her, she started drinking everything. The main character smiled and told the girl that she could cut her hair and put it somewhere as a keepsake. Director Diao came up from the side. He told the main character that he was very arrogant. Director Diao came up and sternly told the protagonist that he needed to be asked to attend the meeting. The fan was very surprised. He did not understand why the director personally came to find him. The guy explained to the man with a smile that he had been set up. Lao Liu had not told him anything, and therefore he knew nothing. The warrior told the surprised protagonist that the director had come here to raise his class in the ranking. Diao asked the student in a dissatisfied voice why he dared to refuse to apologize to his father. Fan thought happily to himself that if the whole class gets a promotion, it will be better for the students. Out loud. He promised the principal that he will be more attentive in the future. The main character cunningly told his partner that his class has the opportunity to participate in the S-class ratings. Shan looked sternly at the guy and said that only S and A-class students can participate in the S-class rankings. The fan answered the man in a thoughtful voice that he wanted to participate no matter what. Shan cunningly told the boy that he should allow all the teachers of Class A to recognize the abilities of Class D. Then he will have the right to participate in the selection rounds of Class S. But there is only a week left before the start of the competition. The main character looked slyly at the director and said that 2 competitions needed to be held. Shan explained to the boy in a stern voice that all the teachers of Class A must recognize him. Van explained to the man that in the first round, Class A should send their strongest students to fight. The protagonist said that they would then hold a second round if it was really impossible. The fan demanded that the principal go and find the senior teacher of Class A right away. As a result, the students will be able to compete in the first round. The main character looked sternly at Director Shan and asked, "Does he agree with this?" The fan turned his back and explained to the man that if that was not possible, then they should simply let the class recognize them one by one. Chu shouted with a joyful voice that there is no one from Class A who is faster than him. C shouted with a confident voice that they can fight Class A. The warrior came up from behind and grabbed the protagonist by the shoulder. He reminded Fanu that Class C and B were defeated by them. The fighter was surprised that the protagonist wanted to go after Class A as well. Shan was unhappy because the protagonist wanted to return to Class S after he insulted the principal. He threatened Fan Yu that he would fire him if he joked. Diao told the protagonist in a dissatisfied voice that he would believe him this time. Shan excitedly reminded the principal that this time there would be a ranking competition between the 2 schools. Diao turned around with displeasure and asked the man if he was finished. The principal told the students that he would break the rules and allow Class D to take part in Class S's competition. All the students cheered happily. The director put his hand on the protagonist's shoulder and said that he could still help him start over. Diao stepped aside and told the guy that he could try leaving some things behind. The fan said to himself in a thoughtful voice that he couldn't leave this. The protagonist stepped aside. He realized that after his family was destroyed in one night, he couldn't just leave. Jan stood near the mirror with scissors. She tried to cut her hair and do her hair. The girl looked closely at her hair in the mirror and decided to trim it further. Jan lost her patience and dropped the scissors. Her hair clippings were scattered around on the floor. 2 students stood to the side and looked at their girlfriend in surprise. They were having fun. Jan was unhappy with her hairdo. Jelly shouted at the girl that she had used a hair growth stimulant. The student looked ahead with disappointment. Shu said in an angry voice that the girl wanted to cut her hair and made a mistake. Lee answered his friend that she was very shocked. The main character came up from the side. He told the students in a stern voice that he had organized several training sessions today that were related to the competition. She said in a dissatisfied voice that he just wanted salted fish. Lee said in a sad voice that he was ready to do anything for food. Yan told her friends with displeasure that the 2 of them had no goals. Chu was holding a book in his hands. He said that he wanted to test his strength. Xiao was sitting at the table and said that Class S was not that strong. The main character approached the students and in a stern voice demanded that they listen to him. At that moment, some stranger looked into the classroom through the door. Fan turned sharply to the side and glanced at the door. After that, the stranger very quickly disappeared. The main character began to tell the students that they would be getting ready. The stranger looked through the door into the classroom again. The fan quickly ran out into the corridor and grabbed the stranger by the head. He asked why he was hiding outside. The guy asked the main character not to hit him in a frightened voice. The fighter took his hat off his head and introduced himself to the main character. The main character hit the guest on the head with all his might and shouted that he should have hit him. The fighter asked Fanya in a frightened voice not to hit him. He came here to apologize. The fighter stood up and said that he was wrong about what happened earlier. He thought a lot about what he was missing. He realized that he was not cultivating well. The main character smiled and slyly told his partner that he could correct his mistakes. The guy looked at the main character with hope and asked, "Will he be able to forgive him?" The fan sternly told his partner that he should ask forgiveness from the student he had offended. The main character strictly explained to his partner that he had to pay for it. In the corridor, two guests were sitting on chairs near the table. One of them was intently reading a book. The purple-haired boy said in a cheerful voice that the principal had agreed to Liu Guan's request. Class D would participate in the Class S ranking competition. The man thoughtfully laid his head on the book. He asked his partner how they were supposed to steal the protagonist's students. Xiao entered the director's office. At that time, Shan was sitting at the table. The woman read the document carefully. She said that it contained information about the quality of Class D. The director would have to examine it during the rating competition. The man took the documents in his hands and began to read them. He told the leaving woman that he understood everything. Shan held the paper in his hands. He thought angrily that as soon as the director arrives, he will see how the cooperation specialists will act. The fan at the board told the students that they would now practice together. They would point out mistakes and be ready for anything. The guy was carrying a large cardboard box on his shoulders. He was approaching the entrance to the building. The man was combing his thick hair and looking in the mirror. He told the loader to use the equipment very carefully. The main character, together with the students, happily looked into the room and said that the equipment was prepared. Liu told the guy in a frightened voice that the new training equipment would be ready soon. The main character grabbed the man by the head with his hand. Fan told the students in a stern voice that they could train on their own today. He would teach them all tomorrow. The main character waved his hand to the students near the exit. He said that they should practice well. He prepared to leave. Yan told the students in a dissatisfied voice that the main character is losing his mind because of romance. The main character turned around and asked the wounded girl if she was okay. Zhu adjusted her eye patch. She told the guy that she would be fine in a few days. They all had to catch up with the competitors. Zhang told his friends in a happy voice that they would train well today. Someone approached him from the side. Liu hugged the guy and slyly asked if he was preparing for a fist fight. He wanted to show him something. The man showed the boy a combat robot called a 3000. It was best suited for solo training. Once connected, the device could detect the status of opponents and give the fighter the most suitable fist-fighting method. The man hit the robot with all his might from above and shouted for it to start working. A girl with red hair passed by. The student said that Class D was training on this side. The stranger in combat clothing thoughtfully repeated to herself the words about Class D. Zhang came up and saw a robot in front of him at the top. He said happily that the device was installed in the most advanced class. The guy swung his arm really wide and decided to try to smash the robot. Zhang jumped high up. He hit the device with a powerful blow and broke the ceiling. The robot fell down. The guy landed on the floor after a powerful blow. A broken device was lying next to him. The student heard someone's voice from the side. He turned to the side with great excitement. The girl with the big swords came up and told the student that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Zhang was very surprised when he saw a student he already knew next to him. The warrior swung her leg and hit the guy on the arm with all her might. The student rolled back after a powerful blow from the girl and got into a fighting stance. He angrily told Hong Yelin not to start fighting so suddenly. Hong reminded the student in a stern voice that she had seen him break the mechanism, so she decided to practice with him. Zhang told his opponent that he couldn't beat him. She just wanted to use him as a punching bag. Hong waved her hand and explained to her partner that everything was fine. She had no intention of using force. Zhang looked at the girl with great displeasure and anger after her words. At this time, the main character was sitting at the table with his girlfriend and drinking tea. They were talking to each other. The girl watched Funem carefully through binoculars. There were other students next to her. She asked the main character at the table, "Is Class D going to enter the Class S competition?" Fan explained to his partner with a smile that his students are very competitive. He is confident that they will surpass the rest. She looked sadly at the guy and said that he would work hard. The girl jumped up. She shouted in a displeased voice that she would wait for the main character in class. The students around excitedly asked their friend with binoculars what she saw. Jan looked happily ahead and told herself that she had found something interesting. The main character suddenly jumped to his feet and did not understand why she ran away from him. That same day, in the weapons training room, students practiced fighting against each other. In the arena, a large stone monster fought against a predatory ball with glowing eyes. Yan controlled her huge stone monster and shouted that she would destroy the ball. Lu said in an evil voice that you should not underestimate the power of the robot's mega training equipment. The man commanded the robot to take on a human form with 2 bright wings. He activated the transformation into pieces of stone. The girl watched with excitement as the huge robot fought against the stone monster. Yan looked at the robot with great surprise and said that he had changed shape and became beautiful. The student asked the guy with displeasure why he didn't teach her some beautiful summoning spells. The fan answered his partner that there was no need for that. He said that the Rockman was also beautiful. The student asked the guy what he was doing yesterday afternoon with his girlfriend. Yan threatened the guy in a stern voice that she might spill the beans if she wasn't happy. The main character told himself in a dissatisfied voice that there was nothing special about it. The fan answered the girl in an angry voice that his student's call was not very beautiful. This was precisely the failure of his work. The main character unexpectedly approached the girl and said that he could teach her to summon any creature. Yan explained to the guy that she wanted to learn how to summon dragons. Fan said to the girl in a dissatisfied voice that dragons are creatures from manuals. They cannot be supported. The girl told the teacher that she wanted to learn how to summon something like that. At that moment, Lee suddenly appeared from the side. He shouted at the students that they needed to run away. A huge, muscular warrior approached the door. Fan offered to teach the girl how to summon scorpions. Yan answered in a dissatisfied voice that these monsters were very ugly. A huge fighter entered the room with a swing and broke through the wall with his body. A stranger entered the room and asked someone to come to him. The fighter had a fish head on his head. He said that the Gas King had serious business with the fat man. The main character and his girlfriend were very surprised. A happy man came up to them from behind. He looked angrily at the huge fighter and sternly demanded that he tell him his name. The stranger asked the fighters sternly, "Are they really challenging the king?" He wanted to show them something. The fighter turned around. He had a bright inscription on his back. He said that this was the king's name. The fighter pointed out to the students the glowing inscription on his back and said that they saw the name of the king. The students looked at the stranger from behind in surprise and saw that it was written about a sliding fish. He repeated to himself discontentedly about the sliding fish. Or he said to himself in a joyful voice about the dried fish. The stranger demanded that the students answer the king about everything they had learned in their IQ classes. Ju ran up to the fighter and tried to rip his head off. The king shouted that he saw everything and asked the guy, what is he doing there secretly from everyone? The student asked the stranger with displeasure, why is he wearing a mask and scaring them all? He wanted to see what the fighter looked like. The exhausted Chu fell to the floor. He was unable to remove the mask from the stranger's head. An unfamiliar guy came up from the side. He said that the fighter was not wearing a mask on his head. The guy's name was Gong Yan. He explained with a smile that Gang was a powerful summoning beast. The student sat and held a small box of food in his hands. He prepared to open it, ate food with great appetite. He thought that the girl was very strict and he could only eat secretly. Suddenly, the student saw something amazing in front of him. He even dropped his food in surprise. The masked stranger told the surprised student that he was shocked that the king was here. Lee looked at the fighter in surprise. He didn't understand why he was wearing a mask. The student threw the bag of dried fish on the ground in surprise. The food spilled out. Lee smiled and looked happily at the stranger. He decided to offer him some food. The boy handed the fighter a lot of fish in his hand. The king said that if this was a product of a sacrifice, he would not be polite. The fighter took the fish and threw it into his mouth. He shouted that the king was happy. At that time, the gong was sitting in his chest and was eating the food with appetite. The boy was very happy to eat the food. It seemed delicious to him. Lee repeated the words about dried fish to himself, very frightened. The king with a mask on his head threw some pieces of fish down to the Gunyu boy. Gong pointed his hand sternly at the guy in front of him and shouted that he was forcing Gang to eat his own kind. Xia asked his friend how it was possible to provoke salted fish. Li answered his partner in a surprised voice that it was all a misunderstanding. The fighter told the student in an angry voice that he would forgive him this time since he had misunderstood him. Xia raised his hand in front of himself in displeasure. He did not understand why the salted fish glowed like that. The fighter stood motionless. Gun looked ahead with displeasure, but could not understand why something was missing. The guy turned around and shouted that they were being bullied. He demanded that the gang hit the student. The fighter knelt down and explained to the guy that people suffer during a fight. Gun folded his hands in front of him. He asked the fighter for forgiveness with tears in his eyes. Gan stopped and thought. He looked at his little friend. After a short pause, the fighter said in a menacing voice that he couldn't just leave it. Gan approached the students. He shouted in an angry voice that they should teach them a lesson. The girl at the board told the students to open their book. She explained that they were now going to study a new summoning beast named Gan. The student showed a drawing on the board. The front and back sides of Ghana had eyes. The girl explained from the drawing that the Gan could see around with his eyes. Therefore, it was impossible to use tricks around him. The student said that the fish's head cannot turn. It can swing from the front to the back. It is best to attack this fighter from the side. The girl came to her senses and said in a dissatisfied voice that her official show was here. She demanded to be returned to the main stage. Gan glared at the students and said that all of Xiaoyang's requests were law to him. She sternly demanded that the fighter teach the stupid child a lesson after they dealt with him. The gun pointed his hand at the student in fear and demanded that the gun teach him a lesson. The fighter raised his hand above his head and a blue cloud appeared above him. He shouted to the guy that he was about to feel his deep-sea bomb. Xia raised his hand in front of him. He activated the summoning protective magic. The fighter launched a huge blue ball at the student. Xia was located below the protective dome. The huge blue ball crashed into the protective dome after its flight and scattered. He told his frightened friend in an angry voice that this was just a tactic. He promised to treat him later. The student spread his arms out to the side. He decided to use a new extreme attack magic. Magic blades began to descend on him. The protagonist thought with excitement that the student had turned the entire barrier into fish sticks. He thought that Xia was very arrogant. She launched magical blue blades at his opponent. He shouted that the salted fish would turn into dried fish. Gan glared at his opponent and shouted that he agreed. The fighter raised his leg and prepared to step forward. The warrior stepped forward with his foot. At that moment, a flying blue blade crashed into the ground next to him. Suddenly, some kind of swirls began around Gao. The student stood nearby and looked at him in surprise. Gao grabbed a huge predatory fish in his hands. He shouted to the student that he would try it now. Bright blue streams continued to rage around Gao. Xia stood to the side and watched him closely. The fighter grabbed a huge fish in his hands and prepared to use it to attack his opponent. Gao swung the huge fish with all his might and hit the surprised student on the head. Xia screamed loudly. After Gao's blow, he flew far to the side. Chu ran up from the side and tried to help his friend get up. Xia was unconscious. Chu grabbed his friend from behind in fright and asked if everything was okay with him. Gao extended his hands forward and prepared to use a depth charge on the guy. Chu looked sternly at his opponent and said that he also wanted to test his new skills. The student fell from a height head first. There were huge blue streams of water around him. The guy flew up and prepared for the attack. There was a bright red glow around him. Gao looked straight up and said that the king's eyes are not an ornament. It would be useless to deceive. Chu thought in flight that he had no intention of cheating. A bright red ball lit up under his feet. The student kicked the ball with all his might with both feet, and a bright explosion was heard over Gao's head. The main character thought very happily that the student had learned attack magic. Chu landed on the ground after the attack. A fighter landed behind him. Gao stood silently, a little smoke coming from him. Chu was kneeling behind him. Suddenly, Gao's head turned red and hot. Smoke continued to come from him. The student sat nearby and did not suspect anything. Chu turned around in displeasure and shouted that he had used all his power. The burning Gao shouted that he was very hot and that he would burn alive. The fighter acknowledged the guy that he had won. The student looked angrily at his opponent and chuckled in displeasure. Gong held a small dried fish in his hand and looked at it. Gun was very irritated. The main character stood opposite him and looked at him. The fighter squeezed the fish in his hands and shouted at the students that they were very hateful. Gun shouted in a dissatisfied voice that the guy gave Ganya dried fish and wanted to turn him into a grilled fish. The main character pointed at the guy and said that he should be calm. He used the master worship skill on the Guna. Gun fell to his knees in fear in front of the main character. He was holding a small fish in his hands. The main character bowed and slyly told the guy to be calm. There was no need to apologize like that. Gun angrily shouted at his partner that he was just having cramps. The guy got scared. He couldn't understand why he started having convulsions from standing. Gong was very scared. He realized that all this could be a ghost. The guy quickly ran to the side. He shouted as he went to the main character that he would make him pay next time. Gun ran to the door at full speed. He thought that he had to take revenge. The guy ran up at full speed and crashed into some huge stranger. The gun stopped and asked the thug in fear, "Is he really blind?" Chu was deep in thought. The main character asked his friend, "What is he thinking about?" Ku said in a thoughtful voice that the fish head was hiding its true power. Gun happily ran into the office and shouted to the students that he was back. A healthy warrior stood next to him. The boy said in an angry voice that this time he had bought himself a stronger older brother. The boy shouted to the fighter that those who had bullied him were in this place. He demanded that Tian Yang hit them all. Chu and his friend stood and looked ahead very frightened. Jan thought deeply. She imagined that the fish could turn into the fighter's head. The girl glanced at the little chick. She imagined how the fighter's head could be the head of a large yellow bird. Jan thought to herself that strange things bring more trouble. The beaten guy looked at the main character in surprise and said that he had come to him for training. Fan and Chu asked their partner with excitement what happened to his face. The guest told with a smile that he had been careless during training yesterday. The main character answered the guy that he had become lazy again. There was a Hun standing to the side. He looked at the guy and listened to the conversation with the main character in amazement. The student sat and slowly consumed the food he held in his hands. Yan happily told the students that they had also come here to relax. Xu was unhappy because she had been having bad luck lately. Li looked at the girl Sui with suspicion. He did not understand what she had been practicing lately. Jan leaned over to her friend and said that if she wanted to see, she could try. A student was sitting on the sofa to the side and watching everything closely. Shui turned to her friend with displeasure and asked if she had finished her performance. Kay removed the bandage from her eye. After that, her eye glowed with a bright blue light. Yang said in a stern voice that she was still practicing low-level summoning. Wang informed her that she would do so until her luck summoning was strengthened. Li looked at his girlfriend in surprise and shouted to her that she was practicing the basics. Li looked at the student and said that this was her wish. Yan told the student to come to her. The guy screamed very menacingly. A bright glow appeared around him. Li continued to shout loudly and menacingly. A laughing girl stood next to him. The student continued to shout. Yang looked at him with displeasure. Jue sat to the side and watched all this. Li looked slyly at his girlfriend and asked, "Is this really that cool?" Jan got angry. She squeezed the glass with the drink with all her strength and sternly asked the guy, "Is he really making fun of her?" Zui drank a drink from a glass and asked her friend if she had met Tian Yang recently. Yan excitedly told her partner that the main character had taken Tianya. The main character at the door told the student that all this was some kind of special training. Fan strictly demanded that the student look after Tia Yang for him. The fighter sat in a meditative pose. He told the protagonist in a dissatisfied voice that he was becoming more and more of a bandit. The fan responded very angrily to the guy that he shouldn't praise him like that. The warrior asked the main character if he remembered the rules of the S-class rating competition. The protagonist said with excitement that dirty fighting is used to accumulate points. The fighter told his partner in a stern voice that the school would send several teachers this year to eliminate the students from the competition. If the students beat the teachers, the score would double. The losing teacher would be demoted. The fan looked slyly at the fighter and said that he should be merciful to his students. The warrior said in a very stern voice that he would not participate in this. If he joined, the competition would end very quickly. The fighter told the main character in a serious voice that he should join. The main character was very surprised and amazed when he heard such words from his partner. There were a lot of people at the airport. A huge plane landed in front of them. Guests at the airport were told to line up before the opening ceremony began. The girl was excited. She repeated to herself that she should not hurry. Suddenly, the guests stumbled and began to fall forward. The old man extended his hand to her to help. The master with the staff told the girl to be careful. He caught her with his hand so that she would not fall. The old man looked closely at the stranger and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl answered the stranger with a shy voice that she was fine. She stood to the side, surprised. The girl looked at the old man with excitement and shouted that this was Huang Taiji. He was one of the 6 elders. The girl excitedly told her friend that there had been an accident in the Ning family. Now there were only 5 elders left. Mr. Ning had been transferred to Class D because he no longer had a patron. The protagonist looked away. The chairman of the school council, Huan, prepared to speak. The old man on the podium told the guests the details about the upcoming competition and how points would be awarded. The last 20 people to survive the competition would be students from the S grade. 5 teachers would also be participating in the competition this year. If someone could eliminate a teacher, the score would be doubled. Huan looked sternly at the students and said that the defeated teacher would be disqualified. After that, he blessed the participants. The moderator invited Ms. Wen to speak on behalf of the 5 participating teachers. The old man was surprised when he saw the main character in front of him. Fan happily greeted Mr. Tazi. The master looked at the main character and said that he looked more skilled. This time, Fan will be one of the 5 teachers of the participants. The protagonist told the old man that he was chosen because of the special case of Class D. Ven finished speaking. She demanded that the teacher of each class carefully prepare for the start of the competition. Huan told the boy that after this test he could return to Class S and blessed him. The main character looked sternly ahead and said that he would try his best. Suddenly, someone came up from the side and grabbed Fanya. The guy turned around displeased. Yang angrily asked the protagonist, "Does he really dream of returning to Class S?" The protagonist used the skill of worshipping the famous teacher against Yang. The guy suddenly slipped and caught one foot on the other. After this, Yang suddenly fell down in a bow before the main character. Fan laughed very loudly and cheerfully. Yang stood behind, surprised and did not understand what had happened. At that moment, a helicopter flew up from above. The presenter from the helicopter shouted into the microphone that the competition was about to begin. A man leaned out of the helicopter and shouted that the competition would be broadcast by Zhao Wenlong. The students began to board the plane. They were supposed to go to the competition venue. The host shouted to the guests that all participants would be sent to a competition on another island. The teacher told the guests on video broadcast that the competition was about to start. He was waiting impatiently to see what would happen this year. The host leaned out of the helicopter and asked the guests, "Can they see in front of them?" The helicopter was approaching another island. It had green vegetation and a high mountain. The host looked up and informed the guests that plane number 1 had arrived. Soon, all the players would be entering the arena. The ramp on the plane began to open and the participants were supposed to exit it. Yan approached the exit of the plane and prepared to jump down. The guy told his colleagues that there was no time limit. The game ends when the last 20 remain. Yang told the students that there were rescuers prepared on the island. If a participant is eliminated or wants to admit defeat, he must send a distress signal. The students cheerfully and unanimously answered Yan that they understood everything. Behind them stood the surprised protagonist. The guy jumped out of the flying plane and shouted forward. Other participants started jumping after him. The fan looked thoughtfully ahead and said that he never thought that something like this would happen in this situation. Lee grabbed the pipe on the wing of the plane in fear and shouted that he was afraid of heights and couldn't jump. The presenter looked ahead in surprise and said that one student from Class D wanted to give up. The main character looked angrily at the student and shouted that he wanted to help him. The fan came up from behind and kicked the student with all his might. He started to fall down. Frightened, Lee flew from a great height of the plane to the ground. He screamed very loudly. The presenter shouted in surprise that the main character hates his own student. The fan waved after the falling student and shouted at him not to forget to open his umbrella. The host watched as the participants jumped out of the plane with parachutes. He shouted that the students from plane number 2 were ready to join the competition. The participants jumped out of the plane and flew down. The host shouted loudly that 3 former S-class players could get a good rating. The man shouted that all the students from the second plane had jumped out, but there was still one person left inside. The girl continued to sit on the plane. Next to her stood a backpack and a weapon. The host shouted that the last champion was sitting on the plane. Hong Ling was already too late to enter the arena. Hong yawned very tiredly and said in a dissatisfied voice that it was very noisy around her. The presenter held the microphone in his hands and watched the girl's actions very carefully. Hong accelerated and jumped out of the plane with a gun in her hands. The host shouted that the girl had finally come out. Hong jumped out of the plane, but did not take her bag with her umbrella. She was holding only a gun in her hands. Sun and another fighter were watching the flying girl closely. There was a bright red glow next to them. Hong used her blade in flight to quickly hit the other participants. Scared after jumping from a plane, he landed on a tree. The most dangerous place turned out to be safe for him. Yang continued to joyfully parachute from the plane. He shouted that this time he would definitely win. The guy shouted angrily that he had formed the strongest group this time. He didn't notice how someone flew up to his parachute from above. Hong, during a successful attack, damaged the parachutes of other participants with very fast blows. Young raised his head in surprise. He did not understand what kind of sound it was. At this time, a girl flew up to him from the side. The guy started falling sharply down without a parachute. He didn't understand what happened. The guy extended his hand forward and there was a purple glow near it. He decided to use his special plan. Young created a huge flying magical eagle and landed on his back. The host was watching the contestants through the drone. He shouted that they would continue to watch the contestant Lin. The girl was descending from a great height onto a mountain. If she could not land safely, she would be eliminated. Hong descended from the heights and reached out to grab the blade from behind her back. A bright red explosion was heard on the ground. After that, stones flew into the air in the direction of the girl. Hong jumped very carefully from stone to stone and landed on the ground. Hong landed confidently and successfully on the ground. After that, she became the student with the highest score. The host looked at the participant and said in a joyful voice that he was interested in what kind of performance she would show next time. He was really looking forward to it. Hong was very tired and fell to the ground, spreading her arms to the side. She forgot her bag with an umbrella. The spectators stood and looked with great excitement at the girl lying on the ground. The presenter wanted to watch the broadcast from other video cameras with great interest. The presenter saw from a drone how the students were running along the ground after the main character. Fan ran at full speed. The host shouted that Mr. Ning from Class D is the lowest-ranked teacher. The guy told the fighters on the go that he would stop the main character. The others were supposed to surround him. The participant extended his hand forward and fire came out of it. He activated the explosion. The participant organized a very powerful explosion, and huge stones fell on the main character from above. Fan calmly extended his arms forward while walking and was able to fight off the falling rocks. The fighter extended his spear towards the guy and shouted for him to stop. The student in glasses told the main character that he was surrounded and demanded that the fan hand over points for them. The fan was unhappy with the participant's behavior. He himself just wanted to maintain some points of trust. The main character extended his hand forward and shouted to the students that they were the ones surrounded. The participants found themselves surrounded by a pillar of fire. They shouted that they were very hot. The student on fire told his colleagues in a frightened voice that they had to finish here. The protagonist pointed his finger forward and activated the command to disperse. The fire gradually became brighter and the students were completely lost in the flames. The protagonist was surprised to see how the participants surrounded themselves with a water shield and fought off the fire. Gun sat next to his fighter gun and told him that it was a disgrace for the participants. The fighter tried to get the boy to stop saying bad words about Odnoklasniki. Gong looked angrily at the protagonist from afar and greeted him. The goon sat on the shoulder of his fighter and greeted the main character in a sly voice. Fan glanced at the boy and remembered that they hadn't fought for 3 days. He decided that Gun was swimming again. The boy told the main character in a dissatisfied voice that he was unlucky today. The fighter told his friends with weapons that they should protect themselves and join him in the fight against the Phanim. The guy commanded his subordinates in a stern voice not to wait for anything and to move forward. For them, this was a chance to double the score. Gao told the boy that it would be very bad if so many of them bullied the boy. Gong angrily reminded the fighter that they had been humiliated a lot and should take revenge. The main character told the guys in a dissatisfied voice to attack together. He was in a hurry. Gong pointed his finger at Fan and in a stern voice demanded that the fighters finish him off. The participants surrounded the main character. Gong commanded the fighters to kill Fanya. The protagonist extended his hand forward and used his bow skill against his opponents. They all fell to their knees. The students all fell down in a deep bow. They did not understand what was happening to them. The student in glasses looked ahead in fear. He did not understand what kind of ability this was. The main character stretched out his arms to the sides and sternly demanded that the fighters stand up. Gong looked sternly at Fan from the side and thought that this was all a very strange move. The boy angrily asked the fighters why they were kneeling in front of the teacher. The participant jumped to his feet and shouted to his subordinates that they now had to be serious. Fan raised his finger up. He shouted to his opponents that if they hadn't given up yet, there was no other way out. He activated the bow to the famous teacher against the students. The main character angrily shouted at the fighters to look at him. All 3 participants were scared. They looked at the main character with great fear. A drone was flying over the mountain valley. At that moment, a loud explosion was heard on the ground. Long said thoughtfully into the microphone that the outcome was a foregone conclusion. The main character was standing at the site of the explosion. 3 participants continued to kneel next to him. The students were scared. One of them shouted that his knees hurt. The leader shouted that Class A was out. The fan remembered the boy and thought that this guy took advantage of the opportunity to escape. 2 students were standing in the forest on a green lawn. Bodies were lying next to them. He looked away with displeasure. He said that all the entries were very absurd. The participants were not his opponents. Chu answered his friend that he did not know how his classmates were now. At this time, a bright light suddenly appeared in the treetops. An unfamiliar girl sat with a brush and looked angrily at the students on the lawn. The artist was drawing something in her notebook with a brush. She said that she had inspiration for new compositions. The girl drew a large hieroglyph on a piece of paper using a brush. The stranger hung hieroglyphs on a tree and a stone. The students did not notice them. He stopped. He asked his friend with displeasure what he was doing. Chu turned around and told the student with great excitement that they had fallen under the spell of others. A group of students walked around the magical lawn in amazement. They saw bright treats and red hearts everywhere. The students walked with admiration across the green lawn and looked at the red flowers in the shape of hearts. C said with admiration that on this island there is such a place. Chu looked at the flower and excitedly answered that it was all about the power of char. The student looked around the lawn with great admiration and said that everything was magnificent. The guy suddenly saw something suspicious in front of him. He looked at it for a long time and carefully. The student pointed his finger at the sky in a frightened voice and said that the heart was getting bigger. The artist sat to the side and held a brush in her hands. She told the guys that it was a gift for them. A huge red heart suddenly fell from a height onto the lawn. He looked at the fallen heart. He raised his finger in front of him and purred in a quiet voice. The red heart on the lawn suddenly began to crack and fall apart. The big heart suddenly shattered into large pieces. A big blue finger appeared inside it. The girl from the pink haze shouted at the student with displeasure that he was a fool. The guy told his friends that they had to go. The girl asked him angrily, "What's wrong with his face?" The stranger asked the frightened boy who he was. The students suddenly felt weak in their legs and fell to their knees. Fan was standing behind them. The main character couldn't understand why so many students were able to bother him. He decided to find Zhang Tian to help him. The host was watching the events from a drone. He shouted that the fan had broken the participants' knees with a mysterious spell. The main character stood and looked attentively at the mountain. He heard some noise in front. The main character turned to the side with great interest. He did not understand what kind of sounds he heard. The main character looked ahead with interest and saw a frightened van running out of the forest. The frightened student ran at full speed and shouted at the guy to step aside. The main character suddenly extended his leg forward and tripped the running student. Van fell to the ground at full speed after being tripped by the main character. The student stood up and angrily asked the main character what he was doing. The students were scared. They saw a huge demonic bear coming out of the forest. A beaten knight was lying on the ground in front of him. Drone watched everything that was happening. The presenter said that the advanced warcraft was the blazing bear. The predator looked at the people angrily. The presenter said sternly that they would now look. Will Mr. Ning be able to break the bear's kneecap? The demonic predator reached forward and crushed the drone with it. The protagonist extended his hand forward and activated a high-pressure flamethrower for protection. A very powerful stream of water appeared. It knocked the bear down and he fell to the ground. The evil predator lay unconscious on the green grass near the protagonist's feet. The main character angrily told Vanya not to leave. He wanted to ask him something else. The main character demanded that the student tell him where Tianyang was. In return, he promised to let him go. Wang said in a dissatisfied voice that he had seen a man with a turtle shell and one who flew. He himself had not harmed any of Fan's disciples. The guy said that both participants are related to Class A. This student is very strong and he did not want to fight him. The protagonist asked his partner, why is he so afraid of this opponent? Van said that this guy is a good candidate for the title of champion this year. He just learned it. The charms require their creator to support them too. He said in a stern voice that in order to break the spell, the people who created it must be driven out. They must be found. Van told the surprised protagonist in a stern voice that they needed to find a position. The stranger controlled 2 participants in the competition with the help of strings. She used spiritual spells of interweaving. Once upon a time in a kingdom there lived a ruler. There were green trees around the castle. The queen had a magic mirror, and she was constantly asking it something. The queen asked the mirror who was the most beautiful woman in the world. It answered the woman that she was the best. One day the mirror answered the ruler that her hair was as black as wood. The mirror told the surprised queen that her lips were as red as blood. The mirror informed the dissatisfied owner that her skin was as white as snow. The most beautiful woman turned out to be Princess Snow White, named Chu Fen. The queen was very angry. She looked angrily at Snow White in the mirror. The ruler turned into an old woman and approached Snow White's house in the forest. The old woman came to the forest where Snow White lived. She handed her a red apple. Snow White ate the poisoned apple and fell dead on the floor of the hut. The gnomes learned that their mistress had been poisoned and had lost consciousness. The gnomes found a handsome prince. He had to kiss the princess so that she would wake up. This prince was called Xiatiangay. The prince approached the unconscious princess's bed and prepared to kiss her. He leaned over to the princess and prepared to kiss her. He closed his eyes. The girl opened her eyes in surprise and looked in front of her at the prince. The princess turned out to be a ghost. The guy wanted to get up and hit his head on the prince's head. C noticed with great surprise that Chu Feng was lying on the bed in front of him. Chu lay unconscious after being hit on the head. C told his friend that it was he who hit him. C lifted up his unconscious friend. He angrily demanded that Chu wake up quickly. The girl continued to paint the fairy tale with a brush. She said that if the guy woke up, it meant he still had strength. A girl with long white hair was sitting in a high tower. The prince was passing through the forest and heard her singing in that tower. The voice of a beautiful, long-haired girl attracted the attention of Prince Se. The guy felt dissatisfied. He realized that all this was happening again. The prince approached the high tower and demanded that the princess let her long hair down to him. The princess was sitting on top of the tower and she was completely covered in hair. She didn't know how to deal with it. The prince slowly climbed the wall. He prepared to climb up and help the girl. He climbed up the tower and shouted to the princess that they had to find the sorcerer. The stranger sat and continued to paint with a brush. She said with displeasure that there was no need to reject this ideal love story. A little more inspiration was needed. The girl drew two guys and there were bright red flowers next to them. The main character quietly approached the girl from behind and asked what she was drawing. The artist in the tree got very scared and started falling down from a height. The frightened girl jumped to her feet. She looked at the main character with displeasure. The fan looked at the student and thanked her with a smile for taking care of his students. The protagonist turned around and asked his friend if he had fought the sorcerer before. She turned around with great surprise and realized that Mr. Ning was standing next to him. The frightened princess stretched out her hand and looked ahead. He stood to the side next to the princess, who was wrapped in hair. The protagonist asked the student if he had fought with a sorcerer before. The guy sat down next to the princess and said with surprise that it was true. Very quickly, he was transported into real life. In front of him on the stone sat his friend Chu. The main character shouted that he understood. The fan turned around and said that it looked like he couldn't shoot the guy. The artist screamed in a frightened voice that the student couldn't notice her now. He jumped to his feet and shouted that he needed to get to the envoy of Shar. The student looked at him in fear. The student raised his hands up and activated a blue protective dome above himself. He shouted that it would be good if they all flew up. The stranger looked ahead in fear and said that she still liked all of this. The helicopter flew over the green lawn and could not reach the students on the ground. Under the protective dome, the battle looked tense. There was a very loud explosion. The girl flew far to the side over the forest. The girl flew back after the powerful attack and landed near a tree. The stranger grabbed her magic notebook with all her might. She needed to do everything quickly before the enchantment ended. Suddenly, lightning flew from the side and knocked the notebook out of the girl's hands. Chu grabbed the girl's album during the flight and said that she would not be able to use enchantment without it. Chu flew up together with the notebook. The girl screamed in fright that her glasses were missing. He came up and looked sternly at the girl. He shouted that he finally caught her. The student sat on the ground and looked ahead in fear. The guy told her that she had to pay now. The girl was very scared. She looked at the student with tears in her eyes. The student covered herself with her hand in fear and shouted at the guy not to hit her. He told the girl in a calming voice that she should give in. He didn't want to hit her. The girl looked angrily at the guy and shouted that she would not give up. She took the magic piece of paper with the spells in her hands. The student activated the spell and the boys were blown back by a bright pink flash. Hearts appeared around them. The student looked ahead with displeasure and realized that the girl had used a spell against them again. The main character cast a spell with his hand and extended it towards the student. Fan waved his hand in front of him carefully and said that he had broken the spell. The main character turned around attentively and asked the student, "Where is the girl?" He said in a dreamy voice that the girl was frightened by his aura and disappeared into thin air. The protagonist waved to his friend and explained that they needed to find Gentian and the others. The protagonist continued to hold his hand outstretched. He walked back to the student. The fan hit the guy from behind with his hand. He asked him sternly, "Is he really making fun of him?" The leader flew over the mountains on the back of his friend, with a helicopter following them from the side. The presenter said in an excited voice that it looked as if Mr. Nin had gathered the students. The presenter shouted that they should thank the students for the unique opportunity to escape. People were watching him on the TV screen. The man suggested looking at the other teachers. He was curious what would happen if they interfered with the game. He opened the image of the map on the computer. The presenter saw chopped trees and human bodies in the forest. He said in a thoughtful voice that this trace could be false. The man saw a huge monster holding a beaten student in his arms. The host said excitedly that Zhou Tian was turning into a Class A training system. Two teachers were standing in the mountains. They lost their students. The students' bodies were lying on the ground. Ouyang approached teacher Ma Yi and asked where the main character was. Xian turned to the guy and said that it was a big coincidence. He was also looking for Fan. Li was sitting on a tree, very scared. On the ground next to him, a huge predatory bear was sleeping. The boy carefully jumped from the tree and fell to the ground. He covered his head with his hands. Li lay on the ground in fear. He carefully watched the bear lying nearby. The student felt safe. He decided to calmly leave this place. The boy stepped forward and accidentally stepped on a rubber duck, which screamed loudly. Li screamed in great fright when he realized that the toy under his foot began to squeak. A huge evil predator with burning eyes stood behind the frightened guy. Li turned back very frightened and said in a trembling voice that he needed to speak slowly. The drone flew over the dense forest and closely monitored everything that was happening below. The participant Jen lay on the ground and covered himself with 2 trees. He said in a cunning voice that he was the most honest one there was. She came up from the side and picked up a large stick. He prepared to hit the lying student. The predatory bear swung with all his might and hit the student with his paw. He flew far to the side. After a very strong blow from the bear, he flew to the side and hit the mountain. The student stood up after the powerful blow upon landing and began to come to his senses. She beat Jen with a stick and shouted in a loud voice that he was very fat. The bear swung his paw with all his might and hit the frightened Li with his paw. The guy looked happily at his friend and shouted that he was very fat. Li smiled back at his friend and shouted that he was very thin. 2 guys rushed forward at the same time and hit each other with their heads in midair. 2 students hit their heads hard after the jump and fell to the ground unconscious. The huge bear swung his paw and prepared to hit the lying students with all his might. The guy suddenly raised his hand forward and fought off the predator's attack. He broke one of the bear's claws. The predator got very angry. After attacking the guy, one of his paws flew off. Shai stretched his hand forward and healed his friend's head with it. He told him that they had agreed to jump with a parachute together. He spent a lot of time trying to find Li. A huge and predatory snake fought against a large robot. It rushed to attack him. The robot grabbed the predator with its paws and began to crush her with all its force. The robot was crushing the snake with all its might in its hands. It was controlled by a girl who stood on top of its head. Yan glared at her opponent and said that he should see the world and her huge statues that she trains. The girl gave the command and the robot began to go through a transformation. At this time, the snake wrapped itself around him. Suddenly, a large bolt of lightning came from the side and cut off the snake's head. Yan looked ahead very frightened. She didn't expect that someone would attack the snake. The girl noticed with surprise how the predator in front of her turned to ashes. The guy landed behind the girl. He asked her, "Is she really summoning at a low level?" A huge mutant monster appeared from the side. It had a large blade at the back. Van told the girl in a lecturing voice that the teacher should disappear and not climb to the top. Its weakness is obvious. Yan told her partner in a dissatisfied voice that they had to kill the beast first. The monster prepared to take out a huge sword and strike the robot in front of him. The mutant swung his huge blade wide and prepared to hit his opponent with it. The robot put its steel hand forward and was able to defend itself from the mutant's sword strike. After this, the fighter swung the blade in his hand and tried to hit the monster from the side. The mutant with glowing eyes put his paw forward and was able to grab the huge blade in the robot's hand. Yan looked slyly ahead and said that now was the best time to test her new secret weapon. The girl reached into her pocket and took out several ampules to use in battle. Yan swung her arms and launched glass ampules in front of her at her opponent. The glass pieces hit the monster's head at full speed and exploded next to him. The monster looked angrily ahead. At that moment, a stone golem appeared next to him. The stone fighters attacked the mutant in the face with bright lightning bolts. He screamed very angrily. The monster growled very angrily and loudly. He grabbed his face with his hands. The girl stretched out her hand forward. She ordered the robot to finish off the mutant. The monster was constantly making mistakes. Van shouted at his opponent in an angry voice, saying that she thought both fighters were the same. The mutant thought that the girl had almost touched his energy. He grabbed his head with his hand. The warrior grabbed the blade with his hand and hit the robot's head with all his might. There was a girl there. Yan fell from a great height head first after the attack. The robot flew into pieces. The girl was flying down from a great height. She felt that clumps of her hair fell. Jan looked ahead in fear and noticed how scraps of hair and broken ampules were falling on her from above. The chick flew up in flight and grabbed the hair with its beak. The girl thought that her chicken had decided to eat the hair. The chick began to carefully absorb the hair of the owner. After that, his body began to glow brightly. A very bright yellow explosion was heard in the sky between the fighters. Everything around sparkled. Van looked ahead with excitement. He could not understand how all this could be possible. A bright explosion shone in the sky, rays flew around. The monster covered his face with his hands. Van covered his face with his hand in great fear and said that it was evolving. The girl was floating in the air. She was picked up on a huge yellow wing by a large chick. Jan flew across the sky. She lay on a huge, fluffy and yellow wing. Van shouted at the monster to kill his opponent and leave him no chance. The evil mutant swung his huge sword and prepared to finish off the robot. Suddenly, a huge chick flew up from the side and stopped the mutant's blade strike. The chick flew up to the big sword and bit off a piece from the side with its big beak. The chick, in flight, bit through a large steel blade with its huge beak. Yan looked at her pet with excitement and thought that he had not changed much. The girl stretched out her hand, and a blue glow came out of it. She decided to address the chick. The owner pointed her finger sternly forward and demanded that the chick fight. She was flying above on a drone. The mutant with glowing eyes held a fragment of his blade in his hands. He prepared to fight further. Yang was flying above the ground. The monster with the weapon stood and looked at her. Van said to himself in surprise about the huge body. He decided that the strength was lost. The chick suddenly flew back to the monster and prepared to attack him from behind. The chick flew up behind the monster and hit him in the back with all its might with its paws. Van looked ahead with displeasure. He didn't understand what kind of sound it was. The guy looked at his huge beast with fear. The mutant could barely stand on his feet. The chick finished off the monster with its paws and it fell to the ground. As a result, Zhang Qili was eliminated. Yang flew up to the chick and sternly demanded that he not be arrogant. They had not found the teacher and therefore could not give the rival a chance to escape. Xia flew over the mountains on a small hang glider. He asked his friends, "Is this the energy of the summoned Bing Shui Yue?" Chu shouted to the protagonist on his back that they could help. Fan turned to his friend and said that he himself was capable of doing this. He was more worried about Zhang Tianyan. The teachers in the class might have problems with this guy. Uyan approached the student and asked if he had met the main character. Gun glared at his partners and said that it was all just a coincidence. There was someone's body sticking out of the wall behind him. The boy smiled happily at the students and said that he was also looking for Fanya. A girl wandered alone among the ruins of the building. She listened attentively. Hong walked carefully near the broken window. The sun was shining on her from the street. The girl walked slowly and looked ahead. She did not expect that someone could attack her. Zhang gestured to his girlfriend from around the corner. Jie glanced at her friend and prepared to use magic. Suddenly, a huge piece of ice appeared on top of the girl. It was falling from above. Hong sensed the danger in time. She used her blade to cut the ice into many pieces. A guy appeared above the girl and flew up. He swung his arm to strike. The participant suddenly jumped up and dodged Zhang's attack. The guy stood and watched in surprise as the girl from above swung her arm to strike. The main character suddenly flew up from the side. He blocked the girl's blow with his hand. The fan raised his hand above his head. He shouted at the girl to stop. The main character screamed loudly. His arm hurt badly. The girl asked sternly, "How could Mr. Lin be normal after he stuck a sword inside himself?" Hong looked sternly and intently at the guy and called the teacher by name. Two guys flew up to a large broken building and landed near the window. Chu came in through the window. He told his friend that perhaps Mr. should come here. Sei looked straight ahead and asked angrily, "Where are the enemies?" Hu heard something suspicious to the side. He turned around intently. The girl stood opposite the main character. Chu asked discontentedly, "What happened?" C could not understand. "Where are the enemies in the battle?" The main character angrily demanded that the girl stop staring at him. Zhu asked her friend if he was okay. Zhang told the girl that the guy had arrived on time. He asked his friend what kind of girl was in front of him. He reminded him that he was a student in the same class in the past. Zhang said in a thoughtful voice that Yin Lin was the protagonist's old disciple. The girl angrily told the main character that after he left, no one taught her. Fan asked his partner for forgiveness for disturbing him. Shan looked at the protagonist with displeasure and asked why he didn't get an instructor. Ouyang said in an angry voice that the crazy teacher gets along well with the crazy student. The protagonist turned around and angrily told the guests that they cannot harm Zhentianyan. Ouyang looked at the main character with great displeasure. He was surprised by his words. Ouyang shouted to his partner that he didn't understand what he said. Large tentacles appeared next to him. The guy shouted to the main character that they came to grab him. He attacked him with tentacles. C jumped forward and activated a magical protective dome against the tentacles. The student was surprised to see the tentacles fall onto his protective dome. He noticed with fright that the tentacles began to suck his strength. Shan ran up from the side. He hit the student from below with all his strength with his hand. The man's hand began to glow brightly. He prepared to attack the guy further. The main character ran up from the side and protected the student from the man's attack with his body. He demanded that Chu leave Ji Tian alone. The main character angrily demanded that the man kneel before him and apologize for harming the student. The very surprised Shan fell to his knees in fear in front of the guy. The main character raised his finger up. He demanded that Ouyang bow down before him. The guy at the side extended his hand forward and said that all of this was true. The system gave the frightened owner an error message. The main character extended his hand forward and was surprised. The system informed the surprised owner that someone had broken into it. It took one day to fix the problem. Ouyang pointed his hand forward and demanded that his tentacles attack the protagonist. Fan walked forward calmly. At that moment, predatory tentacles attacked him from behind. The girl grabbed her huge blade and very quickly chopped the predatory tentacles into pieces. Ouyang asked his partner in a dissatisfied voice, "Did she really attack her teacher?" The main character hid behind the girl. Hong answered her partner that the crazy student always wants to be equal to the crazy teacher.